Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Acelith Design Endurance Championship for 2020. It's Season 6, and it is the final race of the season. I'm your host, Paul TX141 Walsh, also known as Britain a Spit, depending on what media you follow me on. And, well, we have got an absolute showdown at hand today, folks. This is going to be a showstopper. It's a 1.5 hour endurance race, as the final races always are. But we are going to have a monster of a race on our hands here for a number of reasons, which we're going to take you through, with qualifying literally being only 5 minutes away. Due to the fact that this being an hour and a half long, we do start these races a little bit earlier than the 1 hour race. So let me take you through quickly then what is the situation and why this is a big one. So we're going to follow, firstly, Plux the Duck, currently sitting at P2 in the championship from the United Kingdom. Plux running around in the GT by Citroen race car. And it's been a Group 3 race tonight. Plux is the reigning champion after Season 5, but currently sitting in P2 in the championship. Plux is under a lot of pressure to try and regain the lead as of the final race tonight. Given the fact that he is currently sitting in the championship on 254 points, 8 points down on our championship leader at the moment, who is Zefix's Jack. The thing with Plux, however, the pressure point in this competition is that he is effectively the one to lose more points, or not able to gain as many points from this race. Now, why is that? You're probably wondering, what on earth am I on about? Well, what you have to keep in mind for the uninitiated here is that there are 8 races in the season, and only your top 6 results count. Now, given both he and Zefix Jack, who we'll come to shortly, have raced 6 races, that means any points they now earn from this race will essentially be a drop of the worst result they've had previously, and then that will be replaced by potentially the outcome of this race if it's an improvement on their worst possible result. And going into this round, Plux's worst result is a score of 32 as obtained from what was round number 2, where he picked up a 3rd place. So what this means in Plux's situation is that effectively he has got to try and beat 3rd place in this one. So he's either got to come 2nd or 1st to improve. Alternatively, come 3rd and then get fastest lap and the pole lap in order to get 2 extra points for each one of those, taking up to 36. However, meanwhile, his main rival, our current championship leader, Zefix's Jack, running around in the Audi R8 LMS 2015, Group 3 machinery, of course, once again. Jack is currently sitting at the top of the standings with 262 points, and the important thing to note here is that Jack has had a better run of form in terms of his 6 races that are counting towards his final tally in the championship standings, in that his worst result so far is a 20-point result, so a 6th place from round 2, but other than that he has literally across the board had 2nd or 1st places, compared to Plux, who's had a couple of drops with 3rd places. So that means that Jack can improve a lot more by comparison with Plux and extend his lead over Plux by simply finishing P5 or higher tonight, whereas Plux has got to finish as a minimum P3 with the fastest lap and alternatively the qualifying lap or both to improve, or he's got to finish P2 to improve. And with Plux being 8 points down, this means there is a whole number of scenarios where Jack can simply run away with this championship. Alternatively, Plux can snatch it literally at the jaws of defeat. He'll snatch the victory right there and then by the end of this race. Now, we're not going to go through all those scenarios right now, but we can talk about them a little bit later on. But that is the current standings with regards to our battle for the championship win after tonight's race. And it's going to be an absolute showdown as a result. But this is not the only thing you should be aware of. We also have a 4-way battle for 3rd in the championship. Now, currently, we have the Frenchman of Jaganat running around in the Mazda RX Vision GT3 concept. Jaganat is currently sitting in P3 in the championship standings with a total of 158 points. Now, Jaganat's worst result out of his 6 races that combine to make up that tally is a 5th place in round 6. So Jaganat can improve somewhat tonight if he becomes 4th or higher. However, his main competing rivals, which start off with G-Rabbit, the Finnish driver, who we are expecting to turn up at some point today, potentially. Yep, he's in the pits right now. He's coming out the pits in the Ferrari 458 Italia GT3. G-Rabbit, right now, his worst result, sitting on 134 points, so that is 24 points down on Jaganat. G-Rabbit's worst result, well, he's got 2 results, which are currently 8 points. And one of those is counting towards his final tally, with that 8 points representing what was at the time a 12th place. So you can imagine G-Rabbit, if he comes anywhere higher than P11, he's going to be improving massively tonight. And if he can get, say, a top 5 here, well, particularly a 4th or higher, he could have a chance to snatch P3 in the championship away from Jagannath, assuming that Jagannath does not improve on his current tally, and pick up a P4 or higher here tonight as well. And also on top of that then, we come to P5 in the standings right now, and we're just looking around for the driver. Is he here on track at the moment? But we've got Sir Bottlejob, who's currently P5 in the stands, and we can't see him at this time. And we're just going to check our notes to make sure whether he is racing or not. So give us 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, as we'll just follow Gadget 334 around the circuit. But in terms of the sign-ups then, do we have Bottlejob attending tonight? Bottlejob is not racing tonight, so what that means is Bottlejob will not be improving and cannot improve upon his current position in P5 in the championship standings. Joint P4 at the moment, but effectively P5 with G-Rabbit on 134 points. But Bottlejob is not racing tonight, so he cannot improve, and he was going to be the one who would have improved massively by comparison with everybody else in that battle for P3. What of his worst score being a total of, I believe, 8 points. A P12 in round number 2, so he could have gained massively there. And then do not forget there is one other driver in this mix, and that is Mr. Sean. Now we're just going to try and find Mr. Sean. He's currently in the pits running the GT by Citroen race car. Mr. Sean right now sitting on 130 points, so he's 28 off of Jagannath, so he's an outside chance. But you can imagine here, Mr. Sean's worst possible result in terms of his overall point score is 16 points for P8, so he would need to get 28 points. So if Sean was able to pull off a P3 tonight and Jagannath does not improve, then Sean could surprise everyone by being the one who finishes 3rd in the championship. And that's the battle for P3 between what I suspected was 4 drivers, but with Bottlejob out, it's now between 3 drivers, but still, we'll keep our eyes on this. Soft, medium and hard. The track we are at, however, this is the biggest question. Where are we today? Well, we've made our way back from Italy to Japan for the finale. And, well, the thing to note is that this is one of those circuits where effectively you have got to be on the ball, because this is Kyoto Driving Park Yamagiwa. In Japan, it is a fictional circuit, but one that a number of drivers, including myself, would love to be able to race around in real life. However, we are doing the reverse iteration of Yamagiwa, so known as Yamagiwa 2, made up of 15 corners, 4 sectors, and once our drivers start to come onto their fast laps, and I believe Gadget 334 is going to be running the field round to start the qualifying hot laps. Well, unless Flapjack, alternatively Plucks, are able to jump him. Of course, our drivers do not have any restrictions. They are allowed to use one another's slipstream if they feel that can give them an advantage. But of course, that dirt here can make the cars very difficult to control within the heavy braking zones, or indeed the rather sharp and twisty braking zone that is the rundown into the chicane of turn 7 and turn 8. We are braking on the apex of turn 6, but we'll talk more about that when we get onto our first qualifying lap. And we can see that Flapjack is following Gadget quite closely here. And I think the idea behind Flapjack's intentions is that he will want to try and get that distant toe off of his fellow Britishman. So whilst they're waiting all to come round then, in terms of what to expect here in terms of lap times, I'd say that the pole lap will be in the 131s. 132s, the low 132s will be a good qualifying lap, but you'll want to be in those 131s in order to get the most out of it. But let's jump to the onboard with Gadget then and take you through the lap. So coming out of the final corner then, running onto the start finish straight to commence his first flying hot lap. He's going to be going all the way up into 6th gear, or potentially 7th gear in the case of the Citroen, what a bit shorter gear acceleration ranges, and a 7th gear, braking at about the 50 board there for the first hairpin, number of hairpins at the circuit, a 3rd gear hairpin turn 1, and he's going to extend out wide onto the outside curve before charging uphill into the chicane of turns 2 and 3, braking at that 50 board, and wants to toss the car across the apex curve of turn 2 before hooking it on the curve of turn 3. Now running uphill even more to complete sector 1. For the sliced corner on the circuit, turn 4, it is a 2nd gear hairpin here. He's coming all the way down, staying in 3rd gear and then jumping down to 2nd to get that rotation. And now it is the run over turn 5, flat out left-hander here into the downhill run into turn 6. And watch this, he's going to have to hook the car over onto the curve for turn 6 before braking heavily for the chicane that is 7 and 8. Nails 7 and nails 8, gets a good rotation there through in 4th gear, and now charging up the hill to complete sector 2. Another acceleration zone here. Coming through 9 then, a left-hander that's flat out, and then to 10, the first of our 2 extended medium to high speed hairpin corners, where you simply got a downshift, a lift off of the throttle, and then let the the car float and get on the accelerator as soon as you feel ready when the car's not natively understeering, and he's made it through there very nicely, Gadget, completing sector 3. And now it's the downhill slalom of high-speed corners, putting the lift in a little bit for turn 12 there, coming through 13 and now 14, going flat out of course, and now into 15. The final corner, another high-speed hairpin here, lifting off the throttle and doing a downshift initially to hook the car in, and now powering it out for exit. And this opening lap by Gadget, which I think is going to be beaten by Flapjack behind him immediately, is going to be a 1 minute 32 or 33, a 33.0, and already Flapjack goes faster with a 32.7 and Plux with a 32.2. And Berkey setting a 32.2. 33.2 I should say. Jack, however, setting a 32.4, so just a tenth off of Plux in that opening round. Senna coming across the line with a 1.33.2. Jaganat just coming across the line with a 1.32.8, which I think puts him P4 at this point in time. And our drivers immediately hopping back to the pits because all of our drivers are running these cars with no fuel modelled, so they're the lightest possible condition they are in, and they will of course have tyre wear modelled on them, which means that after 1 or 2 laps those tyres will start to show a bit of wear and start to lose some native grip, and it's time to come in and put on a fresh set. So our drivers are allowed to immediately jump back to the pits and go once again. What have there been 11 minutes of this session remaining? And so far, any surprises? Well, we can see that G-Rabbit's done a good job with his opening qualifying lap of a 1:33.1. G-Rabbit has had probably the hardest time in Group 3 in terms of the car choice, particularly the Ferrari, which is very aggressive on its tyres. And we know that G-Rabbit is very strong in qualifying in Group 3, but falls apart in the race because the Ferrari machinery just shreds its rear tyres in particular. So G-Rabbit will be doing his best here to get himself up towards the front and then just simply try to get things going in the race. He'll probably use the softs as he typically has done in the Ferrari machines over the course of the Acelith Design Endurance Championship seasons. Particularly we saw that in his Tier 2 career in Season 5, which led to him being promoted up here where he had to use the soft in order to get that Ferrari home. You can see on his outlap right now getting it very wrong on the exit there of 8 and hooking onto the outside curb. And one thing to note as Gadget comes across the line to improve to a 1:32.9 there, well done by Gadget. The key thing to note for our drivers is that the curbs here define the track limits, so you can run all the way out onto the curbs so long as you keep 2 wheels on the curbs, and also you've got the white lines where there's not curbs available of course. But the problem with these curbs is they're all raised curbs, which means that they can essentially pull the car into the curb because it raises from the track surface and away, and if you get pulled onto the grass then that can lead to the car picking up some unexpected oversteer, particularly in the hairpin corners, which is why you'll see in turn 1 here all of our drivers will just tap the curb if hit it at all, i.e. the apex curb, or they'll miss it. That's my personal preference, to miss that curb because of how dangerous it can be. As we're following Flapjack round now for a qualifying lap and we switch to the onboard, and you can see here getting a good run through the chicane of 2 and 3, now running uphill towards 4 here. Now one thing to note about the FT1 is that this car is a bit of an odd car within its class. Front engine rear wheel drive, now those cars are typically seen as the power cars within the Group 3 category, whereas the other drivetrain, the mid engine rear wheel drive cars, they're seen as more of the handling cars. But the FT1 is actually more of a handling car within its own class, in the fact that it's got reasonable acceleration in the lower gears, but its top end speed is found lacking, and particularly its acceleration within the higher gears. As you're going to see here now we come into the high speed sections of the circuit, Flapjack will start to struggle a little bit in terms of straight line speed. But because of the handling nature of this car, as he really hooks it up there onto the apex curb coming through 10, and that is very impressive, the confidence there just to plant it on the power because he was right on the threshold of grip and worked out. Now he's going to be charging down through the slalom here, and you can see he's doing a very early lift there and actually hesitating to stay on the power through 12 and 13, which means that he's going to lose a bit of time there, and perhaps it's the dirty air of Mr. Sean's car in front, because he's definitely picking up some dirty air from the aerodynamic flow over Mr. Sean's car. Perhaps that's costing him some time, but I would expect that Flapjack is going to be on course to improve here from his current lap as he comes across the line. Then what will it be? Will it be another 32? And it's a 32.5, a definite improvement as we see in the rear of your picture. Awesome Alex now coming through to set a 32.2, which puts him in P2, and really it's narrowing in the top end of the field right now. And I'm noticing one thing in particular: we are not getting the typical fashion of Plux the Duck and Jack being the only ones to compete for that front row of the grid and the all-important P1, as Berkey Baby is coming around then to complete this qualifying lap, currently sitting on what is in that Peugeot a 33.2. The Peugeot being one of those oddball mid-engine rear-wheel drive cars where it has quite a bit of power and good handling as well, so long as you can keep that rear in check in the low speed corners. But Berkey Baby coming across then, and I do not think that's going to be an improvement. No, that's definitely not an improvement. So Berkey Baby staying hooked in P8 for the time being with half the qualifying session to go. Now, whilst we're waiting to see what else can be set by our drivers, you're probably wondering right now as well, what's going to be the strategy for this race? Well, we know that the Super Soft here is going to be the strongest pace-wise. It's approximately a second or 1.2 seconds faster than the Soft around here, because you've got so many zones where the Super Soft's overall grip can be exploited, as Mr. Sean is now coming into the downhill slalom. So we're going to expect most of our drivers to go for the Super Soft, bar perhaps those who are struggling with tyre wear, such as G-Rabbit on their cars. And I think it's going to be pitting every 10 minutes or so. Sorry, not every 10 minutes or so, my apologies. Every 15 minutes or so, what would this be in a 1.5 hour, 90-minute endurance race. So we're looking at either a 5, 6 or 7 stop strategy here, depending on how aggressive the drivers want to go on their tyres. And what with Mr. Shaw not improving, we now got Muller CJ coming out, currently sitting on what is a 34.4, looking to try and improve and get up into the top 10 at this point, being the last of our runners around here, only 12 drivers today. And Muller improving to a 34.0, not getting him into the top 10, but closing the gap to the others. And the V12 Vantage here should have a huge amount of legwork on the straights in the race, but it will struggle with some understeer by comparison with the other cars here. It's very heavily focused around its straight line speed and that all important V12 engine power. And in the downhill slalom, I think that's where Muller CJ in particular is going to struggle. He'll have a lot of speed going into the slalom, but it will be the understeer he picks up through 12 and 13 which will make the car quite difficult to run. Now, coming back up to our current pole sitter then, we know it's Plux the Duck with a 132.2. He's only 500ths faster than Awesome Alex, currently sitting in P2, however. And you've got to imagine that Plux here with the Citroen. Now, the Citroen is one of the stronger cars for this circuit because of its gearing and also its rotation through the corners. I get the feeling that Plux is probably going to be targeting a 31.9 if he can nail it over the course of the qualifying lap. He's currently on an out lap, as we're seeing, and then we're going to jump to the onboard to follow our current pole sitter around to see if he is able to improve. So coming across the line then to start a new lap, he's going to be braking at about 65 metres there, going down to second gear initially and then hooking it straight into the corner there. And I think that was actually a little bit of application, a handbrake going into the corner. You saw how he drifted it through as Jaggernaut improves to a 32.3, putting him in P3 and only approximately a 10th, if that, off of P2 in the form of Awesome Alex. So Jaggernaut is really gaining some momentum. But coming through into turn 4 then, he's going to probably be handbraking it in again from second gear. Just a dab of the handbrake. Not quite there, down in second gear at this point, and Plux really trying to get as much lap time as possible, but I think he's lost some time there coming through turn 4. It didn't look too good in terms of charging around. Now coming down to turn 6, is he going to nail this perfectly? It's spot on for the braking through 6 into 7 and then tossing it across the curve at 8. You can see that Plux is a man on a mission. Now going uphill, will this be an improvement? It's an improvement by a 10th, so he's the fastest man on circuit at the moment, and I think he's going to be trying to go for that all-important 31.9. If he can get into the 31s, that is going to be a huge yardstick for anybody else to beat, and that is a huge shift in the goalposts as a result. So now coming into the final sector, it's do or die at this point. With him being 1.5 tenths up right now, he's got to carry as much momentum into 12 and 13. He's got 12 out and he's immediately on the power, but lifted a little bit through 13 there. The car starting to waggle very heavily under rotation into 13. Now, will he get it through the final corner then through 15? He's going to get on that power as soon as possible and then just simply straight line it across. And will this be an improvement from the championship contender as he's coming down then? It's not an improvement. That final sector was the one that cost him 1.5 tenths, but Plux is still holding on to the lead right now. But alternatively, we do have a best sector from Awesome Alex in sector 3, and as he's coming through, he's only 0.5 tenth off of Plux. Could we see Awesome Alex potentially snatch the pole here as he's coming around then? And this is looking a very smooth end to that. The FT1 doing very well as Gadget improves to a 32.8, moving up to P6, and Awesome Alex comes across here for a 32.212, which means he's only 100th faster than Plux, but that's enough to put him on the pole lap so far, and we'll have to see if Plux is able to respond to that with only 3 minutes remaining, or in other words, that's approximately, if Plux can get it around quickly enough, that's going to be 2 more qualifying laps from Plux. Now Flapjack, meanwhile, another FT1 driver here, much like Alex. Will Flapjack be improving? Well, he's on an out lap at the moment, so we'll keep our eyes on that. What about Zephyx's Jack, however? Now, this is important, of course, because Jack right now wants to be right up the front. He wants to be on that front row in the Audi. Now, the problem with the Audi is it is a handling-orientated car, which is quite aggressive on its tyres. And you can see Jack already has got it very wrong at turn 1 and gone wide and immediately reset back to the pits. So Jack is going to go again here, and he hasn't got long to do it. So he's going to have 1 lap remaining, and Jack's going to have all the pressure on him to improve from his current P4. And Jack needs to at least start on that second row, because if he finishes P3, P3 today, he essentially takes everything out of Plux's hands. Plux will not be able to beat him in the championship standings. That is one of the scenarios if Jack comes home in P3 or higher. But of course, if he sees himself drop down and Plux is able to nail everything, get the win, the fastest lap and the pole lap, well, that throws it completely open. Now G-Rabbit right now coming onto his final lap then. Nobody's improving out on circuit at the moment. He's just going to come through to start his final qualifying lap. Well, actually, I think he's going to get... Wait, it'll be 2 laps because he's got enough time here to squeeze 2 laps in, well, the lap time being about a 1 minute 32. So he's going to be one of the last guys to be able to get in a pair of qualifying laps, and it'll be the same for Plux behind. So G-Rabbit's now on a lap, and let's see what he's able to do as we switch on board with the Ferrari driver. Going a bit deep into one, actually drifting into one there. I think he was very aggressive on the brakes and perhaps didn't respect the grip available to the car, and it means now as he comes into 2, he's going to have to make up time from that drift. Missing the cut over the apex curve there for 2. You can cut it with 2 wheels on the curb and 2 on the grass, and you'll not pick up a track limits penalty, but you can see he is improving, however, half a tenth up on his personal best as he drifts into turn 4. I don't think G-Rabbit's really got his braking points nailed here, and he is struggling a little bit by the looks of things, but we will stay with him because he's still on an improvement so far. Now, will he nail 6? Because he's got to cut onto the curb here, but he's got to do it while straightening the steering as Flapjack improves to 32.2, putting him in P3 right now, and he drifts all the way through, and that is a disaster from G-Rabbit there, and he's completely spun it out and is going to have to wait off circuit as Plux now is the man on a mission and 2 tenths down right now on his current qualifying lap, but he will get 1 more. But remember, with the improvements that are being made by everyone at the moment, Jack now finds himself down in P5 in the standings for qualifying, and this is a nightmare scenario for Jack because this is starting to put things into the control of both himself and Plux for the championship win. And in the battle, we should point out for P3 in the standings, the key thing to know is that right now Jagannat is doing everything he needs to hold on to that P3 in the standings. For qualifying P4 will be perfect for him and put him in the perfect place to get him into that top 3, and that is it for his overall championship run because Bottle Job being out of it, of course, well, we're not racing state as Jack gets it wide, and that is the end of qualifying for Jack. Jack has got it wrong and will not have another lap, so Jack can only start P5 as his highest position. We've just seen that, and he's returned to the pits right now, and he'll be focusing on the race. That is a disaster for Jack, and really this is going to open things up massively as everybody now heads on to their final qualifying lap. So who will be the first driver to come across the line then to complete their lap? We're just looking through, and it will be Flapjack 247, who's currently out on circuit with a 32.2, only half a tenth off of Plux. Now, will Flapjack improve and potentially put pressure on Plux? Well, it looks as though he's coming across the line and he is backing it off here. It doesn't look as though he's happy with the lap and he's just simply going to bring it across. That's fair enough. Instead, he's going to use that time to do a quick practice start. Jagannat has picked up damage on the front axle of the car, and as a result, I don't think that Jagannat is going to be improving here. And he's just coming across the line, so Jagannat does not improve. We're just looking around, we can see that Plux the Duck is in the train and he's currently improving. But as we go around then, we have got Gadget leading the cars down to the finish line then, with Gadget currently sitting on a 132.8. Will he be able to improve here? And he's not far for Jack's time. He's only 3 tenths off, but 3 tenths can be gained very quickly around here. You can find time in droves. And as he's coming through into the final corner and out of it, will he improve? He's currently sitting on that 32.8. This is looking very good. I think this could be an improvement, and it is a 32.7, which closes the gap to Flapjack, but not enough. Sorry, to Jack, but not enough. Plux does not improve, so he will not be starting on pole. Alex does not improve either because he gets it wrong and picks up a penalty. Meanwhile, Muller coming across the line does not improve, and Senna improves to a 133.1, which means Berkey Baby has now dropped a bit down. And really, I think Berkey Baby is the last one who could cross the line. So that is our final standing saying qualifying, and pole is going to Awesome Alex for the final race of the season. And Plux the Duck, whilst not on pole, will be starting alongside him. Meanwhile, his main rival, Jack, will be starting P5. So this is going to throw a huge can of worms into the mix for both drivers as we see now the final standings in the qualifying times. It is going to be on your left hand side, Awesome Alex starting on pole. On the right hand side, Plux the Duck. Behind them, Flapjack and Jagannat, and even further down in P5, it'll be Zephyx's Jack. Watching out for all of them, of course, and also for the fast starter, which is G-Rabbit starting in that P7 on the full throw. So we've got a grid start as usual. And it's lights out and away they go, and Pluck's immediately getting a very good start as Awesome Alex tried to do the start without the traction control, and you could see that it did not work out for Awesome Alex. But he's able to hold on to P2, and look at G-Rabbit already. Remember who we said was going to gain massively at the start? G-Rabbit, as Jack gets it all sorts of wrong coming out of turn 1, has already dropped down to P6 and having to defend here against Mr. Sean now as they come into 2. Sean looking to the inside there but not getting the overlap, so I don't think there's going to be a move on. But Berkey Baby competing here for P8 with Ayrton Senna as they come into 4, and we've got a lot of side-by-side going on right now as we can see Flapjack and G-Rabbit battling for P3 in the hairpin of turn 4. Jack is up into P5 and got past Jaganat there in the hairpin, but as they all start to settle down and form into a line coming into 6, 7 and 8, because it's very hard to overtake into this sector and very dangerous to try and go for the move because of the downhill run. Berkey Baby getting it wrong there, and he's going to lose a lot of momentum and time, and Gadget is going to capitalise on that. As you can see, Gadget building a lot of momentum, and I think he's going to go for the move on the inside here as they come up into turn number 10 for the first time of asking, and Gadget goes to the inside. Will Berkey Baby go for the cutback? I don't think it's going to be on here, and Berkey is going to have to settle down, and now Muller of course will be able to use this momentum with the V12 of the Aston Martin, and he'll have a huge run here as they're coming up to the slalom. Berkey trying to cut wide, and there's been an incident ahead. We've got a yellow flag somewhere out on circuit, ladies and gentlemen. Now who has got it wrong? It is G-Rabbit. G-Rabbit has hit the wall and he's dropped all the way down. That is a disaster for G-Rabbit. So after lap 1 it is Plucks the Duck leading ahead of Awesome Alex, followed by Flapjack, and then it is Zephyx's Jack up into P4 now after G-Rabbit dropped down. Jaganat, then Mr. Sean, and then Ayrton Senna in the P7, and then in P8 as they battle into turn number 1 you can see Senna going to the outside for a cutback on Sean, but Sean planting it well. Gadget is up into P8, Berkey P9, Muller in P10, and looking further back is G-Rabbit coming into the pits immediately to repair the damage, the heavy damage sustained to the car, and then he'll be back out on circuit. Now, just looking around our drives at the moment, you can see Awesome Alex is putting increasing pressure on Plucks the Duck here. He is putting some pressure on it at the moment, but it doesn't look as though he's sustaining an attack. And looking further back, Flapjack has got a good 1.7 seconds to Jack, who in turn is pulling away from Jaganat, and looking behind, Sean and Senna battling into 6, and I think Sean's going to have to give this one up because it's downhill, and it means that the car will naturally understeer out of 6 into 7 if he does not pull onto the racing line and go for that apex curve of 6, and he decides to simply stick in behind Senna, and it's worked out for him because Sean now going to the inside for turn 10 out of the outside of 9, he'll have that inside run into 10, and I think Senna here is going to try and position the car for the cutback, but Sean simply plants it on the apex racing line and says, you know what Senna, you're not getting past this time, you're going to have to do it the hard way into 15 as Berkey goes wide there, and I think Berkey is going to lose her place as Gadget is going for the move on Senna. Senna lost so much momentum through 10, and that means Gadget is looking there, but it's such a difficult place to overtake in the downhill slant, and you can see Senna is struggling with a huge chunk of understeer, and I think he's missed the curb for turn 14 and will be picking up a half-second penalty. Yep, there's the half-second penalty, and he will need to serve that very soon indeed. And Berkey right now in P9 will be able to capitalise on this as Senna serves that penalty somewhere around on the track. Meanwhile, up front, then it's we'll stay with Gadget a little bit longer. He's going to go for the move on the inside here for P7 against Senna into turn 1, but he thinks second of it as Senna goes very deep on the brakes, and Gadget doesn't have that confidence of that inside line. But up front still, Alex is continuing to put pressure on Plucks, but not going for a move right now, and it is opening up a bit up front, although we can see that Jack is starting to feel some pressure from Jaganat. He seems to have a very slow opening sector, and it means that Jaganat is getting ever closer. And as he's creeping forward here, I have to wonder whether Jack is starting to struggle with the layout of the circuit right now in terms of the Audi will really punish its tyres after a brief period of time. And what with this corner having a lot of momentum shifts under braking, you can imagine that Audi is going to feel very unstable after a time. Although what he will have in his favour here compared to qualifying is that he's got 100 litres of fuel in the car, or at least he started with that, and that means that will help keep the rear of the car stable on circuit. Now looking further back right now, you can see that Gadget has dropped away from Senna a little bit as he's falling into the clutches of Berkey Baby, who is looking to make a campaign trail for that P8 position. And behind them, you've still got Muller, and I think G-Rabbit is quite a way down, but you never know what could happen. G-Rabbit running P11. 18 seconds off of P10, but he could gain some places if there's some incidents later in the race. And what with us only being 5 minutes in and we've still got 85 minutes to go, I'm sure there's plenty still to happen as Berkey looks for the move to the inside here on Gadget for turn 15. Now this is quite a good place to overtake, because if you're able to get down the side of your opponent, you essentially control who gets to the apex and gets on the power first. But I think Berkey just didn't have enough of his car alongside Gadget to make it stick, and Gadget simply powered around with a better grip available to his Citroen by comparison of the Peugeot RCZ of Berkey, and that means he's been able to hold on to position for another lap. Now, whilst we have got a brief breather from the action, we are just going to take a quick flick back and take a look at G-Rabbit's start, which was a phenomenal start. So watch this, ladies and gentlemen. Starting in P7, waiting for the lights to go out. He gets a perfect start in the Ferrari, and thanks to its brilliant acceleration, goes down the right, and he takes 4 places in the run down into turn 1. And that is a cracking start from G-Rabbit, and almost picked up a 5th if it weren't for Awesome Alex being planted there. But of course, G-Rabbit has now fallen to the back of the field, and as we return to the live action, we can see that up front, no change so far, and Alex actually seems to have dropped away a little bit. And I do have to wonder here as we switch to telemetry, is Alex simply using Plux to fuel save here and using him to trigger early upshifts? And it looks as though he's definitely doing that, because with the FT1 you normally want to rev this car out to the maximum of its RPM range to get the best possible lap time, but you can see Awesome Alex is upshifting quite early within the upshifting range, and that means he'll save some fuel and be able to put pressure on Plux via the strategy rather than battling on circuit. And that is something you can do to simply outsmart an opponent, and it's working out for Alex at the moment. And as we can see, the championship contender, Jack, currently in that P4, breaking into turn 15 then. Jaggernaut not really putting up a huge fight right now, although staying with him. And well, I think Jaggernaut at this point is just simply thinking to himself that he's got to try and wait for Jack to make a mistake. He's got to be ever present, and he's just got to wait for the British driver to make a mistake so that way he can capitalise on it. So I don't think Jaggernaut has got a raw pace advantage. It's more the fact that Jack does not seem too comfortable with the car right now. As we can see behind, hold on a second, there's been a change of places. Now what has happened to Berkey, baby? He's dropped back quite far. So it looks as though the move got done into 15, because as though coming out of 15 to complete lap number 4, well, Muller was just simply so far ahead. But you'll note that when Berkey went for the move there on the straight into turn 1, he just couldn't get it done because Muller's V12 in that Aston Martin is just so strong by comparison. And that's what Muller's got here. Muller has got a package where if he can get a reasonable run out of each corner and then just simply put his foot down, he's going to run away in the battles down the straights. It will be in the corners where Berkey's got to try and find some magic and essentially get really close and then go for a lunge in order to claim his position, and then try and pull away by simply nailing the corner so hard. But meanwhile, then up front, again, there's no change up front right now as Alex is continuing to fall a little bit back. And in fact, he has fallen out of the slipstream zone of Plux. He's dropped to 9 tenths now, 9.5 tenths, which means that Plux will be starting to pull away if he can keep the lap time, as Flapjack is drifting his way through turn number, what I believe there was 12 and into 13. Now that was a very hair-raising from Flapjack, and he won't want to do that too many times because that'll put wear through the tyres and also put wear through his legs in trying to get the car under control and his arms. But you can see Jaggernaut starting to fall away from Jack, and I think Jack might be trying to find some momentum, and he's getting it slowly. As we can see on the tyres right now, that front left tyre of Jaggernaut's Mazda is starting to show significant signs of wear. And as we switch over to Jack, the wear's very similar for Jack, but Jack seems to be finding his place in the race now and just simply getting on with the job, because the gap between himself and Flapjack is no longer widening, it is starting to stabilise. And you can imagine if this continues, it is going to start closing down. Further back, of course, we can see that Mr. Sean is in a bit of a no man's land at the moment. 4 seconds off of Jaggernaut, and he's got Senna trying to chase after him. Senna, of course, charging around with the Mercedes machinery and really seeming to hook up Sector 1. But I think Senna is pushing very hard right now to get near Sean and get away from Gadget. And these guys are going to have a three-way battle for the time being, but it will be one where unless anybody makes a mistake, I don't think it's going to close up immediately. But the ones who are closest on circuit right now are Muller and Berkey, where Berkey is all over the back of the Aston Martin of Muller. But I don't think Muller is just giving him the opportunity to make a move, simply because he's got so much power to deploy. And again, look how much power is going up into the hill that runs up into turn 9 by comparison with Berkey. Berkey is getting good runs out of the corners, but as soon as it's a power zone, the Peugeot just loses out by comparison with the Aston Martin, and it's saying Berkey is going to have to find a way round. And meanwhile, all the way down the back still, but running around happily is G-Rabbit. And keep in mind that G-Rabbit did make the switch to soft tyres, so as a result, he is trying to extend his stint. But you can see those soft tyres are already showing significant signs of wear. So as we're coming to the end of lap number 6 to begin lap number 7 then, it's no change up in front, and you can see that Plux is creeping that gap out very gradually. But we do have to wonder how much fuel saving Alex is putting in here to put pressure on Plux in terms of being able to catch him through the strategy, because Alex will not want that gap to increase too much, because he won't want to fall back into the clutches of Flapjack, and he won't want Plux to get away with this and simply think that he can start to put his feet up on the dashboard and save fuel as well. And in the battle for P4, Jaggernaut is still there, holding on at a rate of about 8.5 to 1 second and half attempt. And hold on a second, what has happened here? Alex is parked up on the edge of the circuit. And this is a disaster. And I think there's been some sort of collision or something, folks, because we've just seen two drivers literally get parked on the circuit. And we're going to find out Alex has retired the car. There has been a mechanical issue with the car. But what has happened to Flapjack, of all people? Let's find out. So coming up through the hill then, so coming out of 2 and into 3, it looks as though Alex went a bit wide through 3. And now coming up, it looks as though Alex... he's had to, well, there's been a technical issue with the car because he's put on the warning lights there and then just parked it, and Flapjack has tried to go round the car, of all places, to try and go round, and just simply been pushed off. And what that means now, of course, is that in the championship standings, well, with Awesome Alex retiring the car and Flapjack dropping down, Jack is now up into P2, and now this flips the dynamic of the championship lead and the overall win of Season 6 completely on its head, in the fact that Jack right now just needs to come in P2 or P3, and Plux will be at the mercy of Jack in order to win the championship. And that is a disaster for Plux, but great news for Jack. But of course, he's got to keep it on circuit, and he's got to play it smart here. He can't just afford to think to himself that it's over now, because we've still got an hour and 19 minutes to go. We've got a long time to go, and the legs are going to get worn in this one. But we're seeing our first round of pit stops as well. So on lap number 7, a number of drivers have come in. We have had, in particular, Flapjack coming in. Although I think there was damage to Flapjack's car, because note where he's dropped. He's dropped all the way down to P9. And that means he's come out behind both Senna and Gadget, who pitted at the same time. And all of these drivers going to super softs here for a fresh set of super softs. So Flapjack has now got a lot of work to do, but I think Flapjack is going to start to build a hit list, and he'll begin with Gadget as his first target. But remember, the problem with his FT1 in the case of Flapjack is he'll have to do it into the corners. He will not have the acceleration to simply outpace Gadget on the straights here, because the Citroen has the better acceleration by comparison with the FT1, but the FT1 has the handling aspects which are able to rival the Citroen. But we know Flapjack is the faster driver on one lap pace according to qualifying, and we can see here in fact that Flapjack is already creeping closer and closer to Gadget, and I think there might be a move on here into the inside of turn 10. He's going to switch to the outside now. Will he go for the cutback, as Berkey Baby seems to be dropping back and actually in the way of Gadget there, and Gadget gets pit maneuvered by Flapjack there. I think there was a bit of an incident, and Flapjack immediately putting the brakes on. Now that was a bit awkward. I think Berkey Baby had got something wrong going up into the hill section, because he dropped away from P6, and now riding from Berkey Baby here, we're just going to switch to the onboard initially. And I think what you can see here, Berkey Baby does get it wrong under braking, and by getting it on the brakes too early, I think that meant that Flapjack got caught up behind Gadget, and that led to the collision. But Berkey didn't have an instant through that corner in particular, but he did have an instant earlier, because Senna is up into P6 and now charging after Muller in P5. So for Gadget and Flapjack, that'll be frustrating, but of course for Senna right now, this is a godsend, as Gadget has picked up some damage. And well, we take a look back and we can see that Gadget is going to have to get that damage repaired. He's got it repaired. He's put a little bit of fuel in the car as well. And that means that G-Rabbit is now seeing a competitor on circuit. And G-Rabbit is now in the hunt for P9. Remember how the Ferrari driver's woes had materialised? Well, he's now turning those round into a battle for a position on track. But up front, we can see that Plux is creeping away right now, but in the battle for P2, we can see that Jaggernaut is now starting to apply pressure to Zephyx Jack. And I think, as we can see, Awesome Alex returning to the room here, and I'm not sure what has happened, but Jack right now really feeling a lot of pressure. I think the tyres on that Audi have simply gone, whereas Jaggernaut feels more composed. And you can see that the tyre wear between the two drivers is near identical. And Jaggernaut are looking for a little bit of a position there going into 11, but it's not an overtaking point unless you're able to get side by side going into 11 well before the turning point. But Jaggernaut thinking twice there and coming up into 15. I think Jack is just really struggling right now, and he's also got a bit of a latency spike there. Plux, meanwhile, coming into the pits then from the race lead. I don't think there's going to be a change in the race order for the top three. And looking at the rear of your picture there, you can see Plux has already come out onto the straight down into turn 1 once again. But Mr. Sean coming across the line here. And will he find himself jumping up into P2? And Sean, through just simply running longer so far and using the softs as his starting tyre, finds himself in P2 of all places. Now, Sean, remember, in all races this season, has been the one driver alongside Muller CJ who has tried to run the longest possible stints of anyone, and Jack is struggling and lagging everywhere right now, and this is a really bad situation for Jack and Juggernaut and for Sean, because it's going to be hard to tell where Jack is going to be on circuit for the two around him. But in return, remember, Jack right now needs to gain, and he doesn't want to get caught behind Juggernaut or get caught too much up in a fight, because if there is some sort of incident, well, Jack needs to make sure he doesn't get caught in a major incident. But this will give Flux all the space he needs out on circuit, as Sean is looking to hold on, and he's just defending so well right now, Sean, as Juggernaut has used the opportunity there to jump in front of Jack. And now it's going to be about whether Juggernaut can hold on here. And of course, Sean is going to have to pit, and this is important. Sean will have to pit, but if these two start fighting very heavily, well, the gap is already 1.2 seconds, and if they keep fighting, then Sean could find himself gaining a huge amount of time by simply running long. Meanwhile, further back, we can see that Muller, CJ and Senna are coming out of turn 10 right now and up into turns 11 through to 14. And Senna, whilst on the fresher tyres, is not able to beat the V12 performance of the Aston Martin of Muller. And Muller is holding on so well. And I think Jack has got the pass back on Juggernaut. Now, has there been some sort of incident or that? Because we can see that Juggernaut has fallen really far back. Did he just simply get it wrong? Let's find out. So we can't see that anything happened there. What about a little bit further back as we just hop the camera back even further, and it looks as though, well, Juggernaut simply lost a lot of pace and then missed the apex of 12 into 13, and that's what's caused him to drop so far back. And I believe also there has been a move by Senna against Muller here, but Muller is coming back now. Senna's gone very deep into one as we're just switching between replay camera and live camera there, and we're just going to hop back and see what happened in turn 1. So what you could see is coming out of the final corner, so Senna had got past Muller initially, but watch that V12 Aston Martin engine right now. It's just going to come down the right hand side, and Senna had to go as defensive as possible and squeeze Muller, but watch how Senna misses his braking point here and goes very deep into the corner, and Muller says, you know what, Senna, I'm just going to try coming back at you. But of course Senna, on those grippier tyres, was able to avoid losing time by running off here. But Senna right now struggling to deal with the fact that Muller, CJ, going so deep on his opening stint, is just keeping with the running pack in the battle for the top 5 places. And this is phenomenal work by both Muller and Mr. Sean, and to be expected as Jack goes to the move on the inside against Sean into 10 here. And I think Sean knew it was coming. I think we're expecting a pit stop from Sean on this lap, simply because that was an attempt at a cutback position, and I think Sean's wanting to get in the slipstream of Jack rather than simply try to fight him at this point. I'd say that those soft tyres on Sean's car have seen their days and now want to retire and put a fresh set on. And well, in the case of Sean here, he's going to be coming out probably just around where Senna is if he just goes for a tyre change or a little bit further, because the tyre change time here for a pit stop is approximately in the region of 7 seconds, so it's going to position him well. But Sean is going even deeper, so those soft tyres will see 12 laps before they're going to be taken off, but they've got to be coming off soon, because particularly that rear left right now, that is going to make it very difficult for Sean to get traction with a little bit of steering lock out of the low speed zones, particularly turn 4. Sean is going to start losing time there, but Muller as well going along, and I think Muller might be doing what the two of them did back in Austria at Red Bull Ring Short in the Group 4 race, whereby they both timed one another to one another strategies and tied one another up there, and it worked out by them being in a sequence where they were able to do essentially a much lower number of stops and just simply outrun everybody on strategy. But Muller, you could see on braking into 4, they're really having to stop the car now to get it to the apex of 4, and he is losing time gradually. Not a huge amount, because you can see he is closing up on Senna in the acceleration zones, as we talked about time and time again, but he is starting to fall away through the corners, and he needs to switch on to the next stint. Otherwise this is going to prove critical, because he will see himself falling back closer and closer to Flapjack, who right now is on a mission to try and get back into that top 5 after that disaster with Awesome Alex at turn number 4. But never say never, we've still got 1 hour and 10 minutes to go, and anything could happen, of course. Looking further around the field then, Berkey Baby currently up in P8 and not really in amongst anyone right now. 3 seconds ahead of Gadget and 3 seconds behind on Flapjack, and Gadget in a position whereby being 11 seconds ahead of G-Rabbit right now. G-Rabbit having the worst of the innings, but of course he's had to pit off his racing soft tyres, that's why he's dropped so far back. But you think that G-Rabbit is going to be trying to close that gap over by just running the most consistent stints he can, and really if he wants to gain any positions, he needs to have no mistakes at this point. But up front then, we can see that Sean going at 1 more lap, 13 laps, and Muller has decided to box and get off that first set of soft tyres. So we know the soft tyre can do 12 laps before it starts to fall off, and Muller switching over to a set of super softs now and coming out behind Flapjack and Senna here, but not too far behind. And what's important here, because he switched to those super soft tyres, it will mean that he will be able to gain a significant amount of time on Flapjack, who, remember, Flapjack pitted, I believe, on lap number 7 by comparison, but then again, there was that incident which meant that Flapjack had to take potentially an emergency stop and convert it into the end of his first stint. And Muller here is going to be on such fresh rubber by comparison that I reckon it could be only a matter of time before he closes that gap up and starts to get in that slipstream zone. And if he can place that Aston Martin in that slipstream zone, well, then it is going to be curtains for Flapjack on the straights, because the FT1 has such a straight line speed disadvantage, particularly in fourth gear upwards by comparison with the Aston Martin. And he's already gaining, he's already chucked 2 tenths out in the space of sector 2, and now in the uphill run he's closing ever more. Looking further around then, up front, all the gaps are opening up a bit. Plux, I believe, having gone for his initial stop, is just continuing to increase the gap. I think in Plux's instance here, he knows he just has to simply try and prove a point over the course of this race that if things had turned out differently, he would have been the race winner by a huge margin, and on top of that could have potentially picked up the championship win. But again, Plux will not want to lose this one. He may lose the championship today, but he will want to finish on the ultimate high he can, as Mr. Sean is now into the pits. Now this will be critical. He's going to be coming out in, I think, what will be P7 here, as we've got drivers coming down. So we're going to switch the camera over here as he goes down into turn 1, and you can see he's just got out in P5. He's just made it out in front of Flapjack and Muller, and already by going so long in that opening stint and simply not battling but using other drivers around him to give him time on the straights via slipstream, Sean has put himself in a very comfortable and dangerous position for other drivers ahead of him, because now, while Sean is 25.5 seconds down our race leader, forget about Plux in terms of Sean's aspirations here. What you can imagine from Sean's perspective, as he's gone to a set of super softs now and will look to extend this stint probably to about 10 laps compared to the 7 or 8 we've seen from other drivers, is that, well, if it's 2.8 seconds to Senna, call it 3 seconds, and it's a further 5 seconds to Jaganat from there, so we're saying 8 seconds, and then a further 3 seconds up the road to Jack. So 11 seconds between Sean and Jack. That's a pit stop and a bit of fuel. And if there's even the slightest mistake from Jack, Jaganat or Senna right now, Sean can capitalise so much on that. And Sean really right now is the wild card here. He could find himself potentially battling for P2 at the end of this race if he nails the strategy and doesn't make any major mistakes. But of course, to do that, Sean will need to make sure that the guys behind him, such as Flapjack, who are charging right now, where the fact they will have to push a lot more than Sean, well, they'll be wearing their tyres out, but how long will it be before Flapjack pits? Now, based on what we've seen in terms of tyre life, and as we switch to the telemetry of Flapjack's car, I get the feeling we will be seeing a pit stop from Flapjack within the next lap or two. So I think Sean will not have to do much more to hold off the charging Flapjack. Flapjack is not quite in the slipstream zone yet. He is losing out on the straight because of the acceleration of that Toyota versus the Citroen. But in the corners, Flapjack is ripping time out of Sean. But I think it's more by simply attacking and using the tyres up, whereas Sean is going for a more conservative approach and not using his tyre life as much as he can. He's trying to be so sparing on those tyres, and those super softs, if managed well, will provide you with such great tyre life, but you've got to extend them for so long by comparison with what a soft can do. So as we come up towards turn number 4, then you can see Flapjack going deep on the brakes there into 4, and that has cost him approximately 2 to 3 tenths versus Sean. But Sean not having the best acceleration out of the corner. I think, again, that's all part of Sean's strategy here to try and make the stints go long, and he may also be doing some fuel saving. The Citroen is very powerful in its fuel, particularly when you start to add fuel saving on top of it. The only car to beat it within the Group 3 category of the cars that are racing here in terms of the Group 3s is the Ferrari of G-Rabbit, where the Ferrari of G-Rabbit barely uses its fuel because you can upshift so early in the optimum upshifting range. You don't have to rev that car out to about 9,500 RPM. You can upshift at 7,500 and still get the same lap times by comparison and save yourself a lot more fuel. But Sean right now will be thinking in the Citroen that he'll want to save some fuel. He's got Senna ahead of him, and he'll probably be thinking, as Senna is coming to the end of a stint, I reckon Senna's going to be pitting at the end of this lap, that Senna must be pitting soon in Sean's mind, because that's why he's not trying to close this gap up. Senna's goes very deep into 15, and he's got it all sorts of wrong here, and he will need to pit alternatively if he's going to battle with Sean, and immediately he has come into the pit, so that releases Sean, and Flapjack also comes in. So we've called it here, ladies and gentlemen. Sean now is in the driving seat for that battle for P2, because the gap between Sean and Jack right now is only 10 seconds, and that is a pit stop and a fuel load. That is all it is, and Sean is extending the stint, and this is critical here, and I think Jack and Jaganat will need to be aware of this and respond to it, because Flapjack has has come out behind Senna once again. Senna charging into the first of the chicanes here, coming out of turn 2 and up into 3. Flapjack, of course, losing out a little bit initially, but starting to gain now. But Flapjack has got a whole new mission ahead of him in the fact that he will need to close down Senna before he can attack Sean. And between these guys and Sean, well, there's one Aston Martin, the bright yellow and black Bumblebee style Aston Martin, which is Muller CJ's. And Muller here taking a very similar approach to Sean, and you can see these two are actually not that far off of one another out on circuit. In fact, there's only 2.2 seconds to each other. They've both gone to that super soft tyre, and I think from Muller's perspective right now, he will face himself to Sean in the fact that he pitted one lap earlier than Sean on that opening stint, and if he sees that Sean decides to go a bit longer than him, or Sean may be looking at Muller right now and thinking, how many laps can Muller do before he comes off those super softs? I think these two, they're not teammates, of course. Nobody's running for the same team here, as we can see that Flapjack is close up ever more to Senna, as Senna has regained another penalty, probably through track limits through the chicane, the medium speed chicane of turns 7 and 8. But Senna right now feeling a lot of pressure from Flapjack, and these guys are closing up. But for Muller and Sean, whilst they're not teammates, they will be using one another's data in order to figure out how to plan the next stint in the strategy. But as we switch to the onboard of Senna's car then, and we take a look back, well, we don't want to look through the girder in machinery there, we can see from his rearview mirror that Flapjack, the Toyota Flapjack, is getting ever closer. And, well, Flapjack, I think, will need to think about where he strikes here, because he will need to attack in a position where Senna is at his most vulnerable in terms of momentum. Because if he simply goes for a move on the inside and then they're side by side out to, say, turn 4 into the acceleration zone leading into 5 and subsequently downhill into 6, then Senna will simply out-drag Flapjack. Whereas the alternative would be if Flapjack is able to get alongside Senna going into 1, and then they're able to continue that fight into 2, then it may be the case that Flapjack is able to curb Senna's momentum enough so he can get the move done before they get to 4. But it'll be close, of course, and you can see just as we switch away from Senna's car that at the moment they are exchanging lap times, and Flapjack is not gaining too much on Senna, and it's all because of the power of the engine of that Mercedes. That V8 grunt just simply coming in handy versus what I believe is the V6, correct me if I'm wrong, ladies and gentlemen, of the Toyota FT1, or that being the prototype of the second generation Supra that was released a couple of years ago. But you can see coming out of turn 10, in fact, Flapjack got a really good run there using the Toyota's handling by comparison with Senna, and Senna is losing momentum here as they come up into the final corner. Then I think the move's going to be on, and Flapjack dives to the inside, and it'll be side by side through the corner, and Senna's backed out of it. Senna, I think, knows he cannot sustain the challenge, but by going for a back out and cut back, now will Senna make a return here in terms of attacking into turn 1? I think he's too far back here, and I think Flapjack has got the move done and can now start chasing down Muller CJ. And as they come under braking, it's confirmed then, because unless Flapjack gets it very wrong on the exit here, Senna will be the one who has lost the position and will now have to try and find a way of getting back at Flapjack, which of course he will be able to do initially in the straights, but it's the corners where Flapjack will probably be thinking to himself that he can start to pull an advantage. But speaking of advantages, we can see that Muller has only got an advantage of 1.4 seconds on these two, and that is coming down gradually right now. Muller is starting to lose time to the two British drivers behind him, but again, remember, Muller is on a very different type of strategy here. It's not about attacking every lap in Muller's case, it's about nursing the car and making the tyres go the distance. And Muller is of course in a commanding position because he is losing time. He's lost 4 tenths in sector 2 right now, but again, in return, Flapjack and Senna are cutting tyre life off, and they're also going to be using more fuel to chase after Aston Martin. And now the question for Flapjack will be, where does he attack the even faster in the straight line Aston Martin compared to the Mercedes he's just beaten? As Plux comes into the pits then from the race lead with an advantage of 17 seconds over Zefix's Jack, and we can see that Jack has pulled away from Jaganat now. Jaganat falling to 4.2 seconds back on Jack, and Jaganat is being chased still by Mr. Sean, and the gap between Sean and Jack is still at 10 seconds as Jack comes into the pits off of a set of softs. So we didn't notice that Jack went to a set of softs, but he's pitting at the same time as Jaganat is coming off his set of super softs here. So Jack probably feeling as he goes back to the super softs that the soft was not good enough to essentially extend tyre life or give him the pace he needed. And you can see that Sean, by running so long, has come right close to the rear of Jaganat as Jaganat has just got back out in front of Sean. So that confirms to us that the pit loss time for a tyre change is about 6 to 6.5 seconds. If it's nailed, of course, but we didn't see what the delta was as Sean came to the pit entry, which is where the delta would have been its most accurate. But what you can see right now towards the rear of the field is that G-Rabbit has come into the pits, and whilst Gadget is still chasing after Berkey Baby in the battle for P8, G-Rabbit was getting closer and closer to Gadget, but now has to do it all again. But Sean, of course, will be thinking to himself at this point, okay, I haven't been able to do enough to eclipse Juggernaut in terms of strategy right now, but I've still got a lot more to go, as he gets it all sorts of wrong at 7 there. And I think Sean is probably thinking to himself right now, got to calm it down. He might be getting a little bit frustrated. And I can see in the rear of your shot, ladies and gentlemen, sorry about this, Muller CJ has just dropped position. Now, can we catch that on replay, or did it happen? I think it's happened into turn 1, because Flapjack was already ahead of him into turn 4. So whilst we're looking at the strategic battle for P2, P3 and P4, Flapjack has got it done, and Muller right now has not come into the pit, so it's happened on the circuit, probably into turn 1 in the rundown starting at lap number 19. But you can see that Muller is dropping time already to Flapjack, and he's got the fast approaching Mercedes of Ayrton Senna behind him, who will want to also mirror Flapjack's intentions in due course. As we come on to then an hour to go, and we're going to take a quick sip of water before we get back underway with a little bit more commentating. So Senna here not really able to gain on the straight. He is gaining in that slipstream zone, but not at the pace he would like to. You can see he's only gained really a tenth within that slipstream from the start-finish straight all the way down to turn 1. And Muller right now just needs to play to his strengths. He just needs to keep playing to the strength of the fact he's got that straight line speed, and try to tighten up his sections through the corners, because that is where you can see Senna is getting closer and closer through turn 2 and 3 in particular. Senna seems to have a very aggressive but very well kept line by comparison with Muller, and it means that he's getting closer. But then again, coming out of 4 now, you can see that while Senna initially gets close, Muller's able to start pulling away in the acceleration zones, and it's only because of the power of the slipstream that Senna's really starting to close back up. And under braking into 7-8, again it's the same thing. Senna closes, Muller starts to pull away, and then the gap starts to close down. And Muller there, for example, pulled away 3 tenths, and then that gap will start to creep down as they come through 9 and up into 10. So it's a trade-off here, and it's essentially a game of chess for these two drivers in terms of understanding one another's strengths and weaknesses. And I think Muller here is the one who has the greater knowledge. He knows what Senna's trying to do, and Muller's just simply planting the car lap after lap where it needs to be. Now further back, of course, we can see that Berkey Baby is starting to feel a bit of pressure from Gadget. Gadget is getting closer and closer as they come out of 20 and into the run, so not out of 20, out of 10, and then the run down to 11 through to 15. And I think Gadget here could be looking at a potential move, but of course he's got to be cautious of the fact that he'll be in the dirty air of the car in front of him. And in fact, Berkey has gone wide, and that means Berkey has dropped the position, and Gadget just simply passed him as Berkey rejoined the circuit. Now we're just going to take a look back at what happened to Berkey. I think it may have been a case of a little bit of understeer, and those where he's taken some damage to the front bumper and also to the front right tyre, so Berkey is into the pits. But let's see what happened for the Peugeot driver. So he's coming down the hill then, he's going to lift initially coming through 12 or into 12. He decides to lift just at the apex, and then he hits the curb, and you can see what's happened there, ladies and gentlemen, although it's not clearly visible, is he hit the curb of 12 in particular, so of 13 head on there, and it means he's come out behind G-Rabbit in terms of repairing the damage. But the important thing to note is because he hit the curb head on, the front end of the car was launched into the air, and that cost him the stability he needed to make 13, and as a result, the damage he picked up going into the wall, and now he finds himself in a two-way battle for P9 with G-Rabbit. Now coming out of turn 4 then, G-Rabbit will of course be on a very different strategy, with his tyres not being anywhere near as fresh, those racing super softs, and Berkey having gone for a tyre change as well, I believe. I think he'll be going for the move in the near future if he can get close enough to the Ferrari, which is very strong in its acceleration, but loses out in 5th, 6th and 7th gear. I believe it's got 7 gears, the 458. Looking further up ahead then, once again, we can see that Muller is still ahead of Senna. He's still doing enough to keep ahead of the charging Brit. And the Mercedes driver, whilst he is closing every time, you can just see the Muller's doing it enough to stay ahead. And ahead of these guys, Flapjack is getting ever closer to Sean right now. That gap now down to half a second, and Flapjack, I think, is looming for a potential move on P4. But of course, the trade-off here will be in the fact that Flapjack has to find somewhere where he can curb Mr. Sean's momentum, because Sean right now, if he's not able to defend it, what he'll simply do most likely is give the place to Flapjack and then tuck in and use the slipstream to stay with Flapjack before he comes to the end of his stint. Now he is 3 seconds down as Flapjack goes very wide upon entry into turn 4 there, but you can see he went for a cutback, and I think this is where Flapjack is going to go for the move. I think what he's recognised is that Sean is weak in turn 4 and he can gain a lot of momentum, and he's going to look for a move into 6, but that means he's going to get a lot of understeer downhill. But look at the pressure that Flapjack is applying right now to Sean, and he's staying so close that while Sean will have an acceleration advantage, Flapjack has carried the momentum, and I think Flapjack is actually going to go for the move into 10 here. He just needs to hook it up on the braking point, or more of the lifting and downshift point, and he's got it there, and he's on the inside now. Will Sean go in for the cutback here, or will he give the position up and simply decide, right, you know what, Flapjack's got past, now I'm going to use him as my tow car. Extending that virtual tow cable, if you will, in the form of the slipstream zone behind Flapjack's car. And I think that's what Sean's doing here, because he's not coming back. He's being mindful of the fact he's in that dirty air right now, and will pick up understeer through the slalom. And Sean is playing this perfectly right now in making sure he doesn't lose any time battling with the guys around him, and instead sticking to the strategy. This is smart stuff by Sean, as we mentioned previously. Now, will Sean pit at this point? No, Sean is continuing to go long on these tyres. As we can see in the rear of your camera shot, Muller CJ comes into the pits, and I think that's going to be critical information for Sean in knowing how long those softs can go, sorry, the super softs can go, in the fact that Muller has finally come in and he's coming back out in P7, and he'll be going after Senna and also Sean and Flapjack in the battle for potentially P4. Now looking further up, of course, Flapjack right now being 3.1 seconds off of Jaggernaut, and then it being only a further 6 seconds up the road to Jack. So again, from Sean and Flapjack's perspective, it's only 10 seconds to P2, and we've got a long way to go in this race in terms of the strategy element, and I think Sean will be the one who's best poised to interrupt the intentions. But Jaggernaut, I think right now, will be thinking to himself that he needs to try and find a way to get a move on, because Jack has found a lot of momentum and pace over the course of the last couple of stints, and well, definitely in Jack's case right now, I think Jack is really starting to find some form, and the gap between himself and our race leader Plux, who has disappeared off the road at up 18 seconds, Plux and Jack are not closing on one another right now, but I think Jack is starting to find that he can attack the circuit more. His confidence is coming through, and you can see that in his run through the downhill slalom, in fact, where he's starting to hit those curves and drift the car onto the curves, and that is helping him with the rotation aspects. Of course, Plux is going to keep on trying running, but the flip side of the coin will be, how long will it be now before Jack starts to find potentially some pace over Plux? As we can see, that gap has come down by 2 tenths at the end of lap 24, but there's still a long way to go in Jack's aspirations if he wants to win this race. Now, speaking to Jack, of course, at the end of the last one, we'll come back to that in a minute. We can see Flapjack is now coming to the pits, and this releases Sean, of course, up into P4 as Flapjack comes out behind him. Now, will Flapjack clear Senna? This is important. I think he's done enough to clear Senna, because Flapjack is coming into the apex of turn 1. Senna's just coming onto the apex right now, and Flapjack has done enough to clear to clear Senna, and that is important for Flapjack. So if he was behind this driver, no, I think he would be absolutely fuming that the strategy hasn't worked out. Gadget coming out of the pits now as well, and we can see that G-Rabbit has been able to get past Berkey Baby through the strategic element, but of course G-Rabbit still needs to pit and take on a new set of tyres in the very near future, and Gadget will be out of his sights because he'll have to pit in the near future by comparison with Gadget, who's just come out of the pits. So we've got a bit of a three-way battle lining up for P8 potentially here, with Berkey and G-Rabbit definitely contesting P9, but I have to see what happens with Gadget as we go into the next 2/3 of this race. But looking further around them, we can see the lonely existence right now up front of Plux the Duck, albeit he'll be happy with this because of the fact that he's just simply allowed to dictate the race pace all the way up front, and he's got everything he could want advantage-wise. But of course, he'll want Jack to somewhere make a mistake, or for somebody to get in the way of Jack, simply because this is not going to guarantee him the win in the championship right now. If anything, Jack is doing everything he needs to stay ahead in the championship. Now, let's take a quick look, of course, at the fastest lap in terms of the data that's available. So we'll just switch that on, and we can see that the fastest lap right now is owned by a Plux the Duck lap 132.6, whereas Jack is on a 132.9 for his personal best, so 3 tenths off of Plux's fastest. And I think there might be a little bit of a competition between the two for who can set the fastest lap, whereas Jaggernaut right now starting to move into the 33s and 34s, and I think from Jaggernaut's perspective, he is actually struggling a little bit in terms of pace, because we can see he did have a moment on lap number 18 where he simply lost 4 tenths, and I think he got it wrong in chasing after Jack, and that gap between the two drivers is continuing to open up, and Sean is falling a bit further back here out of the fight for P2, and I think he's now more in a fight for P3. As we can see, Sean is continuing to press on, matching Jaggernaut's times here, but his personal best was 133.8, as Sean's super soft tyres, particularly the left-hand side tyres now, are starting to show significant wear, and he will feel that through the right-handers, particularly the 2 high-speed hairpins of 10 and 15, where those left-hand tyres take an absolute beating by comparison. And behind him, Flapjack is on a mission right now to get back past Sean, and he's doing so at a comfortable rate. He is closing, but again, remember now, Flapjack has to find the way to get past Sean. As we close the data then on our screens for the time being, we go away from the telemetry data. I think Flapjack will be going for a move in the very near future, and I think it could even be into turn 15, because look how much momentum Flapjack is carrying this time. And I think Sean is coming to the end of his stint here, and Flapjack may give Sean the benefit of the doubt and just give him this corner and the end of the lap to pit, otherwise he's going to throw it in. Although I can see that Flapjack is actually really carrying a lot of momentum here, and if Sean's planning to pit, he's going to have to back out of it, or he's going to have to stay out on circuit. As Flapjack got it done on the inside there. Great move by the British driver, and Sean deciding to tuck in behind and potentially looking for an opportunity. But then again, I think he's backed onto the racing line and stayed out of the slipstream zone because he doesn't want the overspeed going into turn 1, because he knows that fighting with Flapjack will be worthless here, because he's got much bigger fish to fry in terms of fighting for P3 should Jagannat not be able to pull away from these two. But keep in mind that gap between Sean and Jagannat right now is only approximately 6 seconds, and while Sean will be pitting soon, if we switch over to Jagannat's car, he will have to pit as well. So Jagannat could be expected to have to do 1 or 2 more stops by comparison with Sean, and that's how this will play out to Sean's favour as we move towards the second half of this race. It has got a bit spread out on track, folks, unfortunately at the moment, but it's all coming down to the strategy, and it's a bit quiet, but you can imagine that something will kick off a little bit later on in terms of cars coming together. Now, of course, coming back to Muller CJ, Muller doing everything he needs right now to come home in P6 and potentially even contest P5 or P4, in the fact that he's just simply putting in the laps, keeping himself away from the danger zone that is Senna, where Senna is a danger to his strategy, interrupting it and battling with him. And Senna right now has probably got to look as much ahead of him as he has behind him, while finding himself in a bit of a no man's land, 3.1 seconds down on Muller CJ and 9.6 seconds ahead of Gadget in P8. G-Rabbit still running out on circuit on a very worn set of super soft tyres, that front left in particular looking haggard by comparison with the other tyres on the car. And I think with G-Rabbit, he's going to be pitting soon. As you could see there, he was having trouble getting the car locked in and some understeer carrying him through. But coming into the pits right now, and this is important in the battle for P3, is Jagannat. Now, will Sean also come into the pits? We have got a pit stop for Mr. Sean. We know he's just come in. And that means Flapjack has jumped up into P3 and is on a mission to try and clear Jagannat through the pit stops now. These two being on slightly different strategies, albeit they're doing similar intentions, but Flapjack finds himself ahead of the Frenchman. And, well, Flapjack now is the one who could dictate the pace in that battle for P3, and he's just got to run with it here. That's important for Flapjack. He's just got to nail every lap and not let what happened earlier phase him. And in the pits right now, we've got G-Rabbit switching on to another set of super softs, just giving you the update there. And as for Sean, he's found himself out in P5 once again, but he has got Muller, and note how Muller has caught up immensely to Sean here. Now, when Muller came into the pits, in terms of his gap to Sean, it was 2.5 seconds, but Sean has actually stayed out too long, or alternatively, Muller has had some fantastic laps on the start of this stint, and what it means is that Muller right now is in the position to chase after Sean. And Senna's not far off these guys. You can see Senna in the rear of the camera shot there as he goes very wide out of 8. Plux the Duck, of course, coming into the pits, as we can see on our timing screens. But we're just going to stay with the battle for P5 out on circuit right now, as while Senna's fallen off, I think Senna here is the one with the pace per lap, if he can hook it together. Muller CJ is on a charge on a similar strategy to Sean, and Sean, I think, overextended that stint and finds himself now in the precarious position of having an Aston Martin breathing down his neck, where that Aston Martin will understeer through the downhill slalom. But you can imagine, whenever he gets an opportunity to run in the slipstream of Sean's car, it is going to be an absolute monster in chasing after the Citroen, because the Citroen's a good accelerator, no doubt, but the Aston Martin is oh so more powerful on the straight, and that is where Sean will want to deploy it. But you can see that Sean has pulled away through the final corner in the downhill section, and he's pulled 4 tenths just through that sector alone, and that's enabled him to get away from the charging Aston Martins. I think Sean here has got his tyres up to temperature and will be safe now. He'll be having one eye on his rear view mirror and making sure not to make any major mistakes, because if he does, then Sean could find himself battling for P5 for the rest of this race rather than chasing after P4 and P3. Now, further back, we are seeing that Berkey Baby and G-Rabbit, Berkey having to pit in the near future then whilst on a set of softs, and G-Rabbit having recently made a stop. So this is the battle for P9. It's continuing, and G-Rabbit, the Ferrari driver, getting closer and closer to the Peugeot of Berkey Baby here, although not having the best of turn ones there by comparison with Berkey Baby. And I think G-Rabbit here will need to put in a lot of work to offset the fact he's dropped 3 tenths to the Peugeot driver in the opening sector. But I think really every point is going to count here, and G-Rabbit being the one who could gain a huge amount from tonight's results, but just finding himself once again, much like the first Group 3 race in this season, race 1, finding himself in the position of being so far back that he's challenging for the scraps of points and not where he ideally wants to be. But it's still a valiant effort right now, and we'll wait to see what happens as G-Rabbit is trying to charge after Berkey, closing up the 3 temps then in Sector 2, and Jack is now into the pits. Now, where is this going to put Jack out? He's not going to go for fuel. He goes to a set of softs here, and I think Jack is trying to figure out what he wants to do in terms of the tyres, because this is the second set of softs he's gone to, and he's gone so far super soft, soft, super soft, soft. And I think it might be he's extending stints, or alternatively he just feels that he needs to trip onto a different tyre in order to enact the pace out of the car. Because normally what we'd see is if a driver feels particularly comfortable on one compounder tyre, and it's normally the super soft as we've seen all season, and it's the super soft tyre that is used and abused. But in Jack's case here, he seems to be finding as much use out of the soft as he is out of the super soft. Now in the battle for P9, we can see that it's starting to intensify, and running on board with G-Rabbit coming into turn 1. Is he going to go for the move on the inside here against Berkey, baby? And he's going for the move, ladies and gentlemen. He's broken very late, and now will he catch on Apex? He's just about planted it, but Berkey, baby, positioned himself well and just had to lift out of it a little bit there as G-Rabbit started to return to the racing line and powering on. But Berkey, baby, charging after the Rabbit right now, and who's going to be the hair out of the two of them here? Will it be the baby or the Rabbit? We'll find out shortly, but I'm sure one thing's for certain: the baby's going to be throwing everything out of the pram right now, teddies, dummies and everything to try and get that P9 back. But I think Berkey is due for a pit stop in the near future, and it may be a little bit of a futile effort here, although keep in mind, of course, G-Rabbit is on an offset set of strategies right now, and so Berkey could find himself back out in front of G-Rabbit if he pits in the imminent future and then puts in a set of qualifying laps, if you will, as he gets it all sorts of wrong there coming out of the medium speed chicane that is 7 and 8. And I think Berkey will be due for a pit stop very shortly, because those rear tyres in particular are just seeming to light up a bit too heavily. Now looking around once again then, Plux, the gap between himself and Jack has come down quite a bit, in fact. Now, has Plux taken on fuel? Yes, we can see that Plux has taken on fuel in the car, and that would explain why the gap has come down quite a bit. It was 18 seconds last time we checked it. It's now 13.5 seconds. That's because Plux has taken on fuel in the pit. Jack, meanwhile, in P2, running 5.8 seconds ahead of Flapjack right now. That gap hasn't really closed up too much, and Flapjack's finding himself now in the no man's land of trying to chase after Jack, but at the same time making sure to get away from Jaggernaut. Jaggernaut running on a similar pace to Flapjack, but these guys are on those different strategies, and I think Flapjack's going to be the next one of them to flinch and pit. But I wonder whether Flapjack is going to try and make the stint go as long as possible and essentially try to synchronise himself to Jaggernaut's strategy right now, because if he can do that against the Frenchman, that will be very powerful for for Flapjack's intentions as they come into the final half an hour of this race, because what it will mean is Jaggernaut will now find himself a position down on a driver who went all the way down the field and has regained all the time simply by running an optimal stint by comparison with his opponent. But Jaggernaut, of course, do not rule him out. We know the Frenchman is very fast, and if he's going to pull off a blinder, it's going to be him just simply because of the fact that he pulls surprises out of nowhere. And in that Mazda, very confident in the power of the Mazda. In race 1, he had the similar valour in terms of being that confident in the power of his Mazda machinery, the rotary engine, as it screams down the straight here to begin at lap number 31. And looking further back through the field then, we can see that Muller finds himself being pressured a little bit by Ayrton Senna, and I think Muller is starting to get to the end of his current tyre life on his super softs. But Senna, meanwhile, not able to close up too much, and again finding himself in that uncomfortable position of gradually gaining, but not enough rate of knots to be able to make a move. And effectively, he's got to wait until Muller hits the cliff of his tyre life. But Muller now will have enough data to know how long he can go on those tyres before he hits that cliff, and he'll probably pit just as that cliff has been triggered, and that's what Senna needs to try and avoid, getting into these scenarios where he finds himself behind Muller and behind Sean when they're not hitting the cliff. As we can see, coming into the pits is Berkey, baby, onto a set of softs, putting the fuel in the car then. So Berkey is fueling a little bit right now, not to go to the end perhaps, but just going a bit deeper in, and this may throw a curveball into G-Rabbit's battle with him for P9. Gadget in P8 at the moment, finding himself in a very quiet space, not really seeing anybody out on circuit. I think Gadget right now will be thinking to himself, gee, I wonder if I can put on the telly whilst I'm running around on circuit. Well, of course, you can't do that because that will absolutely distract you. But it's a bit of a lonesome place for Gadget, just doing lap after lap with the Citroen and staying in a comfortable P8. But he'll want to close up, of course, on the higher position, particularly that top 5, because he's in a battle with Muller CJ in the championship, of course, for P7. And Muller right now holding on to that P6. And Muller still doing a good enough job versus Senna. And these are the closest guys out on circuit in terms of battling on track. And Muller just simply holding on. And I've got to imagine that Muller right now has been putting a lot of practice into just managing this race pace, because whilst his qualifying wasn't perfect, the race pace he's putting in so far is really showing off what that Aston Martin can do in the hands of a highly capable driver. And with 40 minutes to go then, we should do a quick recap of all of our drivers and their current positions out on circuit as Gadget comes into the pits from P8, and we'll be coming back out in P8 unless he takes on a sizable amount of fuel. And Gadget does indeed on our timing screens come back out in P8 comfortably ahead of G-Rabbit, who is approximately 5 to 4 seconds behind him as they come under braking into turn number 1. So going through the field then, it's currently Plucks the Duck who is leading the field, having started P2. He was able to get up into P1 on the opening lap and pulled away from the field, and really he's been alone up front, holding on to what was the fastest lap until very recently, where Zefix's Jack has now put in the fastest lap of a 1:32.3, which means Plucks will need to grab that lap back if he wants to give himself the ultimate number of points in order to try and win the championship. Unfortunately, however, for Plucks, his main championship rival for winning Season 6 and the championship in 2020 is Zefix's Jack. He's currently sitting in P2, had a disastrous start, starting in P4, and found himself dropping all the way down the field there. No, my apologies, it was P5, and find himself dropping down to P6 and then starting to make his way back up into the field, getting to P4, and then through sheer coincidental luck, it would seem, with Flapjack and also Alex having a major incident, Alex having to retire the car and Flapjack being on the receiving end of a wayward Toyota FT1 in his own FT1, found himself having to concede the position to Jack, which released both Jack and third place man currently jagging out the Frenchman, who was ahead of Jack but then has fallen off the pace a little bit since then. And well, it has not worked out too well for Jaggernaut in terms of chasing after P2, but holding on to P3 right now. But he has got a fast charging Flapjack, who in P4 at this time haven't recently pitted, and that was not on camera. But what we can tell is that Flapjack, having pitted, is on a different strategy from Jaggernaut and Jack. And already he is chasing after that P3 in the Toyota FT1. And he's doing a very good job of it, having recovered so many positions after the incident on the opening laps with Awesome Alex. Mr. Shaw, meanwhile, again, the surprise element in terms of going for the longest possible stints out of anyone in the Citroen. In P5, running around comfortably in a battle, what we thought was originally going to be a battle for P2 between himself, Jack, Jaggernaut and Flapjack, but now finding himself dropping a bit away from the battle for P2, potentially a battle for P3 or P4, depends on how the strategy plays out, but really, he's in a bit of a no man's land in P5, waiting to find out what happens. And he does have a building amount of pressure coming from our 6th place man, Muller CJ and the Aston Martin, who has been doing very well on a similar set of long stints alongside Sean. But the difference is Muller seems to be gaining time every stint on Sean, and having pitted quite recently, or due for a pit stop quite soon, I should point out, he'll be pitting in the near recent future. Muller right now finds himself in that position where he could close up to Sean, and Sean being on those soft tyres now, I think really he's trying to extract as much time as possible, as deep as possible on each stint, and I think this is going to be the curtain call for Muller to come into the pits. So Muller comes in from P6 and he's battling with Senna and needs to have synchronised pit stops. Now this is important because look at the fuel that Senna's got available to him, and this means he will come out ahead of Muller, who's also gone with a little bit of fuel and put on a set of softs. Now Muller will know that Senna will be going a lot shorter distance by comparison with him on this next stint. So Muller does not have to overtake Senna here, but he needs to be as close as possible to Senna by the end of Senna's stint to jump back into P6. Behind these guys, P8 is Gadget 334, who has been in a very lonely place out on circuit, much like Plux, finding himself not gaining on anyone and not losing time to anyone. He is seeing, of course, the guys Muller and Senna ahead of him right now, and having put on fresh tyres recently, it may be an opportunity for Gadget to gain places, but we feel that Gadget is on a bit of a different strategy here, and it's not necessarily coming his way right now. But if it is, it'll be right towards the end in the final half an hour where we'll see Gadget start to open up that battle for P7, P6 and potentially P5. Behind him, you've got Berkey Baby in P9 right now. After a set of pit stops by both Berkey and G-Rabbit, Berkey finds himself ahead of G-Rabbit, the Finnish driver running the Ferrari, who's literally just stopped. And well, these two are contesting P9 at a snail's pace in terms of the strategic element. So it's quite spaced out on circuit right now, and really we are waiting to see how the strategies come together. As meanwhile, we look ahead of us and we can see that Jaggernaut is being pressured by Flapjack now, and Flapjack going for the move into turn 1 and under brake, and he's gone to the inside, but will Jaggernaut get the cut back here? As coming onto the racing line, and you can see that Flapjack is going to go defensive to the inside on 2, and that means Jaggernaut is going to be compressed off of the racing line there, and I think he's going to have to concede the position. And was that just simply the case? I think it is that Jaggernaut's tyres have hit their cliff, whereas Flapjack's tyres are fresher, and Flapjack has really just been putting in the laps, and he's back up into that P3 position, and Flapjack is the man on a charge right now. But of course there is a gap of 11.8 seconds between himself and Jack in the battle for P2 if it opens up, and I think Flapjack here at this point just needs to focus on nailing every lap as if it's a qualifying lap if he wants to try and get after Jack. But we have got a significant discrepancy in terms of the pace right now between Jack and Flapjack, where our P2 man seems to be just a little bit ahead in terms of pace, but we can already see that Flapjack is starting to pull away from the Mazda of Jaggernaut, the Frenchman falling back, and I think there's going to be a pit stop due for Jaggernaut at the end of this one, because he will not want to lose any more time on those heavily worn tyres now that Flapjack has got past him if he wants to stay in that fight for P3. That was a very good move by Flapjack, coming down deep on the brakes there into turn 1. Me. So Jaggernaut, I think, no, Jaggernaut is going at one more lap here, and I'm not sure about the strategic decision because he's already lost since he got passed by Flapjack. He's already 1.5 seconds down, and I think unless Jaggernaut suddenly pulls it off the lap of a lifetime, I think he's only going to lose time now, and I suspect by the end of this lap that gap is going to open up to 2 seconds, and this is not where you want to be right now, behind the guy you're competing with and losing considerable amounts of time, because sure, Flapjack does not have the fastest car for the circuit, but he's in a much more comfortable place right now, and he will not want to lose too much time to Jaggernaut or Sean. And Jaggernaut, pardon me, will not want to lose too much time to Sean or have Sean gain too much time, with Sean finding himself in that P5. And Senna, having got past Muller in terms of the pit stops here, and the fact that Senna is starting to creep away from Muller. Again, it's a similar situation for Senna as he gets very deep on the braking into turn 4 there, and Muller just simply nails the brakes, and that's going to take a lot of life out of Senna's left front tyre in particular, because it locked up on the braking and slid and probably flat spotted the tyre briefly there. The problem now for Senna and Jaggernaut is they're both on the losing sides of their particular strategies, as Senna drifts it out of 8 as well, and I think Senna is putting too much pressure on himself and the car right now, because he's just losing time left, right and centre, and that's half a second he's lost to Muller CJ, who's charging after him, and it's continuing to grow the loss as Flapjack, as Plux the Duck I should say, now comes out the pits and moves on to another stint commencing in lap 37, and Jack meanwhile closing up, but of course Jack is on a much more worn set of tyres, and you have to imagine that he will be pitting in the very near future and coming off those softs, as Jaggernaut is finally into the pits, and that gap was 3.3 seconds upon coming into the pits. And now this is going to be important because Jaggernaut is putting fuel in the car, and Sean has now come up into P4. Now Sean of course is light on fuel, and at the same time as well has got heavily worn tyres, but he has been putting little bits of fuel in here and there, Sean, in his pit stops. But this is a bad news situation for Jaggernaut, because he will have to try and close up to Sean, because we know a tyre only pit stop is 6.5 seconds at most, and he will do that because Sean has already had a little mistake coming through too, the car going sideways there, and then Flapjack right now can just simply creep off into the distance, and if he keeps nailing the laps, I think by the end of this stint for Flapjack, he could find himself coming out ahead of Jaggernaut. Might be by a hair's width, but it will be enough, and that will put pressure on Jaggernaut to have to really push in order to close up. And you can see already in the pursuit of Mr. Sean, Jaggernaut has closed up almost a second, but Sean will be coming in soon, and it's not ready for Sean to interrupt that battle between himself and Flapjack. He's in a different strategy, which will put him into that battle by the end. We look further back, of course, and we can see that Senna got it right this time through turn number 8, charging up the hill into 9 now. Muller CJ closing a little bit here, and again it's the same theme as we talked about before, in the fact that Muller gains the most on the straights versus any other driver here because of the machinery available. And into the pits comes Jack from P2. Now he's going to put on a set of softs and he's going to put fuel in the car. Where will this bring him out? And you can see, actually, talking about where this brings him out, it's quite a surprise here. You can see that Flapjack is not too far behind. Now, of course, Flapjack will come for a pit stop in the near future, and I think Jack will just need to get the tyres switched on. But Flapjack is inching ever closer to Jack on track right now, and the time gap between them, I think, will reopen soon. But it's probably something in the back of Jack's mind. He won't want Flapjack to get too close. As coming into the pits is Mr. Sean. He switched a set of super softs, put some fuel in the car, and he's come out in P5. And the important thing for Sean is he has cleared Ayrton Senna in the pit stops this time, and in fact he's brought himself out with a nice bit of space between the Mercedes driver and Muller CJ in P7, and this was critical for Sean because Sean seemed to be falling back into the clutches of a battle for P5 and P6 and P7, whereas now he knows he's clear of that and he can look forward to the battle for P4, P3 and potentially P2 as Senna picks up another half-second penalty for track limits in the low speed chicane at turns 2 and 3, and that is a concern for Senna, of course, because he will need to burn those penalties off. He's already started to do so gradually, and Muller will want to benefit from this by simply getting closer and closer to Senna every time he makes those mistakes. And it's getting difficult for Senna because he finds himself sandwiched between two cars, which he's got to try and work out where his strategy fits versus those. He's not on the same strategy, and he knows he has to do more stops based on his current strategy. So this is frustrating for Senna, because what do? Do you stick to your current aggressive strategy and have to essentially simply rip life out of the car, or do you suddenly try to match your strategy to the guy in front and behind you? And in Senna's shoes right now, if I was him, unless I really did not feel comfortable trying to make the tyres go a longer distance and I could try and match the pace of the guys around me, I would have to consider really going on the attack right now for this final half an hour, turn it into a half an hour qualifying session, because Senna could be losing out potentially to Muller CJ and could even be falling back to Gadget if things go wrong as it stands, because Gadget, remember, whilst he's in P8 right now, is getting closer to this battle for P7, 6 and 5, and well, it could be any one of these four who come home in that P5 as things currently stand. Of course, they're all going to have to take pit stops, and some of them will take more fuel than others, but there are questions surrounding them as Plux is coming up towards the second half then of lap number 39. 16 seconds ahead, so that gap between himself and Jack is closing up a little bit. It's closed up by a second since the previous stint, but it's not enough for Jack to be able to mount a overall charge for the race win right now. Remember, Plux has taken all the fuel he needs to go on to the end, whereas Jack right now still has a fuel stop to go, at least one more fuel stop. Important information, of course, in Jack's mind, because he will have seen that Plux did take on all that fuel. So Plux has all the cards up his sleeve. It's got all the aces in the hole. And Flapjack right now not really falling off the back of Jack. Now, of course, Flapjack will need to take on more fuel in the next pit stop by comparison with Jack. But Jack's not really getting away from the Toyota FT1 driver who's chasing after him. And this is going to be on Jack's mind, I think, because he'll be wondering now whether he's ending up in a battle for P2, P3, or whether he can just simply hammer the laps in and clear the driver behind through the strategy and overall race time. Flapjack, I think, is not coming into the pits at this point. He just didn't use the full track limits there. And in fact, he's lost a tenth and a half there by not extending out of turn 15. You could see that on the Delta. You want to run as wide as possible to carry as much speed as possible out of the final corner. And Flapjack knows that really in the overall contention right now, he finds himself in a battle when he needs to keep that gap between himself and Jagannath above 18 seconds comfortably to come out in front of him, but 17 seconds is a minimum here in terms of the fuel, because otherwise, unless he's going to underfuel the car and go for some aggressive refueling stops here, Jagannath could get back into the mix. But Jagannath is finding himself falling into the clutches of Mr. Sean here, and if we look at the tyre wear, Jagannath has just got a little bit more tyre wear than Sean right now, and I think Sean is again trying to extend the life of these super softs, trying to be smart with them, getting a bit wrong out of 2 there, going up into 3, and that will cost him some time. Senna, meanwhile, is really taking the life out of his super soft tyres, and Senna will know as a result he's going to lose that ground on Sean and find himself falling back into the clutches of the Aston Martin and Muller CJ, which is doing very well on its tyres right now, but keep in mind Muller is running on the soft tyre. But then behind him as well, you've got Gadget on a heavily worn set of super softs, much like Senna's, but Gadget's got a bit more life in these, and he's coming into this battle. So we have got a four-way fight forming as Berkey Baby comes into the pits then for another pit stop. And where will this place him? Well, it's going to bring him out, I think, side by side with G-Rabbit here coming out of the pits. Oh no, that's Plux up, my apologies, who's flashing his lights already to tell Berkey Baby get out of the way. He also have blue flags waving as Plux goes a bit deep into the corner there, probably just an emergency manoeuvre, but I think G-Rabbit has cleared Berkey Baby in the battle for P9. So the closest guys are battling on circuit right now, as it looks as though Jack there had it all sorts of wrong coming down into turn 1, or just simply getting on the power a bit too much there. But you can see that Flapjack, whilst he's fallen off a bit, he's lost a second over the last couple of laps. He's not falling away that much. In fact, he's closing up out of turn 1. I think Jack right now is starting to feel the pressure of having Flapjack chase after him. Flapjack is coming to the end of this stint for sure, but the flip side of the coin really is that Jack has got to find a way to counter Flapjack's strategy, because Flapjack could surprise him here. Gadget's into the pits, ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know, from P8, so he's going to fall back quite a bit, but now he'll want to hammer the next couple of laps so he can potentially get the jump on Muller, Senna and Sean as they come into the pits. There's going to be a sizable gap between them, but again, remember, Gadget is now in the commanding seat in terms of he will be able to push and try and close up the gap in terms of race time. And I think Flapjack is really going for this here, because that gap is not open up. Now, of course, there might be a question, is Jack pacing himself to Flapjack here and simply doing so? And we can find out a little bit, see if he's doing any big fuel saving as he's coming onto the straights. And it doesn't look like Jack is doing any major fuel saving or pacing to Flapjack here. I think Jack is going full out, but Flapjack is just stepping it up a gear as they're coming into this section of the race. So with 25 minutes to go, it would seem that there is going to be a race on for P2, that Flapjack has got a lot of work to do to make that battle happen on circuit. And in the strategy, you can see that Flapjack losing out a bit under braking into turn 15 initially, but then concentrating on the lines, and he's coming into the pits now, so he's hit the end of the road in terms of that stint. Now we'll keep an eye on what the gap will be, but also the important thing is with this man versus Flapjack. Now Flapjack had a gap of 18.5 seconds coming into the pits, and I think Flapjack has done enough. Flapjack is going for the safety stop. He's gone for a mini refuel there, and that means that the gap between himself and Jaggernaut is going to drop to approximately what will be about 10 seconds. But the important thing here for Flapjack is, and for Jack ahead of him, is that he is now a huge danger to Zephyx Jack, because simply put, if Jack makes even one mistake, then Flapjack is going to be all over him come the end of this stint, and it will run to the finish line. But in terms of what's happening on circuit, Senna's just come out the pits as well, and he's come back out in front of Gadget. Gadget not closing up too much on the outlaps of his stint. But remember, the one who Gadget would be racing with more here is Muller CJ, who's out on track still, putting in the laps, putting in the effort. And I think Muller here is finding that he's starting to head to the cliff as he goes a bit deep into 4 and misses the apex there, doesn't quite get it hooked up. That'll cost him about 2 to 3 attempts. But ahead of him, the thing is that Sean right now as well, Sean will know that it's time to step up. He's got a lot more life in these tyres still, but he'll need to step up right now with both Senna and Gadget pitting, and he'll know they've got at least one more stop to go, if not 2, because of how long they've got to go per stint. I think Sean and Muller will feel comfortable having seen that Senna and Gadget have flinched early, but of course, the call will be now, when do these guys pit to go for that final stint? Will they go long on this current stint, or will they decide to go long on the final stint and then try and hold position out on the circuit? But meanwhile then, up front, we can see that Flapjack is starting to close the gap down a little bit to Jack. It's 11.2 seconds. But again, Jaggernaut behind 10.8 seconds as he comes out of the final corner from what we're hearing. It's not closing up too much, but Flapjack does have that command right now. But remember, he doesn't have the fuel to get him to the end of the race. Well, we don't believe he has the fuel to get to the end of the race. It may be marginal. So Flapjack is in a bit of a position right now where he has to decide how hard he goes. Does he go full pelt here and try and simply turn it into 2 sprint stops? Oh, sorry, 2 sprint stints, 1 more stop, or does he try to play the long ball here? And I suspect it's going to be sprints to the end. Jack, meanwhile, of course, we know that he's probably got a little bit of fuel left to take on board, because he didn't take on a huge amount of fuel when he came on into the pits, but he will be due a pit stop in the near future because those tyres are starting to move closer and closer to their aforementioned cliff. Up front, meanwhile, 15.6 seconds around, and just casually sauntering around on circuit is Plux the Duck. And what I suspect may happen is when Plux sees that Jack has gone for a pit stop, because let's take a look at Plux's data here. I think Plux might try to go for a fastest lap right towards the end of the race. He'll judge the gap. He's very good at doing it. He's good at judging the gaps. He's very good at timing cars out on circuit, and plucks them in and try and go for the fastest lap right at the end, because he knows he's got time, and if he makes a mistake, as long as it's not a major mistake that sees him going to a wall and pick up damage, well, he'll just simply be able to gain a huge amount of time and then go for that fastest lap. He'll definitely need that fastest lap, of course, in order to keep his championship hopes alive. But right now, in terms of his championship hopes, the big question comes down to this driver in P3. Will he be able to put himself in front of Jack and potentially trigger a big fight between Jack and himself, which may bring Jaggernaut into the mix? I think Jaggernaut's a long way back, however, and I don't think it's going to be possible for Jaggernaut to get into that fight. And I think Jaggernaut finds himself getting closer and closer to a potential battle for P4 between himself and Mr. Sean. But remember, Sean will be pitting sometime soon, so again, it's all offset here. And as for Jaggernaut, well, he definitely finds himself in that battle for P4 with Sean, because his tyres are coming to end of life. He's got the fuel to go to the end, but he hasn't got the tyres, whereas Sean, I think, has got a sort of similar situation where he's got one more stint to go after this one. Muller, of course, again, also being a little bit of a spanner thrown into the works there. He's coming towards the end of a stint, but we have to wonder what Muller is going to be able to do, the Muller magic, in terms of strategy, because he was gaining massively with Sean, but now he seems to have fallen off a little bit, and Senna closing up on him. But of course, Senna knows that he needs to overtake Sean, well, not Sean, sorry, Muller out on circuit, or we theorise he will need to, in order to pick up that P6. It's not going to come through the strategies here, because Senna is down on the stints in terms of strategy. And the same with Gadget. If Gadget wants to move up, he's going to have to do it all out on circuit rather than through the pit stops. Well, that's what we believe. And we see that our race leader then comes into the pits for what we suspect will be his final stop, unless he's going to go for a fastest lap stop. And this means that the gap between himself and Jack will come down, because Jack hasn't pitted. Well, I don't think Jack has pitted. It will come down to approximately what will be about, if we do it on our time predictions, about 8 seconds coming into turn 1. But again, this will not pressure Plux by the slightest, simply because he knows that Jack still needs to take at least one more pit stop, so that gap will reopen up. We've got Berkey Baby running around in P10, who's going to be lapped by Jack in the near future. And we can see that Flapjack has not really closed up too much. He's closed up by not even a second, half a second over the course of his stint so far. And really, I think Flapjack is finding he's hitting a bit of a wall in terms of the pace versus Jack right now. Jack may have stepped it up just simply to avoid Flapjack gaining, but then I say that, you can see that he's already taken a further 2 attempts out in Sector 1 versus Jack. Further back, we've got Mr. Sean still chasing after Jaggernaut, and these two, of course, both due for a pit stop sometime soon, but who is going to flinch first? That's going to be the big question between these two drivers. With 20 minutes to go then, we're coming towards the end of the race in terms of the strategy element, and now it'll be coming down to drivers racing on track for those positions or trying to gain one another. We can definitely see that Jaggernaut is losing a huge amount of time now to Mr. Sean, where that gap is coming down. It's opening up every so often, but Jaggernaut seems to be hitting the cliff in terms of his tyres before Sean. Sean, of course, being on super softs versus Jaggernaut being on super softs, but you can see those left-hand tyres in particular of Jaggernaut are just struggling now to give him the grip he needs through the high-speed hairpins, and he's going to feel it even more in the slalom here. As we switch to the onboard, you're going to see he'll have to hook the car into the curbs even tighter and lift a bit as he brings it downhill then, and it's just not a comfortable car to run right now, this Mazda, because of the tyre wear. Flapjack, I believe, as we switch over to what's going on here, I think Flapjack has finding himself up into P2 for the strategy. Of course, Jack will have taken on a fresh set of super softs here and the fuel to go to the end. Flapjack does not have the fuel to go to the end, we do not believe, and those super softs will not take him to the end unless he ekes out the ultimate tyre life. But right now, Flapjack is in a position whereby he's going to be in the way of Jack, and will he be able to do something here to essentially dent Jack's aspirations at P2? Jaggernaut, meanwhile, has pitted and he's come back out and he's behind Mr. Sean, but importantly for him, he's ahead of Muller, CJ, Senna and Gadget. And well, the thing about Jaggernaut effectively now is that because he's got the fuel to go to the end versus Sean, who's got the fuel to go to the end, Sean's just due a tyre stop here, and Jaggernaut's going to have some very heavily worn tyres come at the end of what we suspect is going to be his final stint. So Sean, I think, will need to react sooner rather than later, unless he's going to try and go all the way to the end on this set of tyres, which would be a Herculean effort, but I don't think it's going to be possible. But never say never. If somebody's going to make the tyres go to the end, it will either be this guy or alternatively our P6 driver of Muller, who is still holding on against Senna right now, but he will need to come into the pit soon, not just for a fresh set of boots, but also for a revision of his fuel tank, because he is coming to a critical point on his fuel, and Senna has not got enough fuel to go to the end, I do not think, but he's got a bit more tyre left, so I think Senna's going to extend this stint beyond Muller pitting. But the thing about Senna as well is once he comes in, once he gets past Muller, he's then got to put in the absolute Herculean set of laps to essentially come back out in front of Muller when he goes for his pit stop. So from Muller's perspective right now, this is a win-win, and all he needs to do is hold Senna up a little bit, make life uncomfortable for Senna for as long as possible until he pits, and he's doing exactly that, and he's got the perfect car to do it in, because so long as he doesn't get it drastically wrong through the corners and Muller nails the acceleration point on exits such as through 15 here, Senna hasn't got the straight line speed to outrun the Aston Martin down there, the Mercedes V8 just not having the legs, and then Muller is immediately into the pit. So Muller is calling this, he's run out of fuel, but he's calling this early, and what it means is that whilst he's going to be coming out behind both Gadget and Senna, he will now be in the commanding seat for the battle for P6 for certain, because these guys will have to pit one more time unless they're going to go all the way to the end on their current tyres, which I do not think is going to happen for Gadget nor for Senna. Both of these drivers showing considerable wear, and you can already see it in Senna. He is absolutely attacking the circuit with malice, because he knows now it's qualifying time for him. If he doesn't put in fastest laps for himself, personal best, then, well, immediately we'll see that Muller just simply takes back the position and taking things over. Plux the Duck now has the fastest lap down in the bar for the raising the bar for the fastest lap to a 1:32.3. So it's important for Plux here. He needs to hold on to that. Now, of course, will Jack respond here, or will he simply keep his cool and know that he doesn't need the fastest lap as things stand? He just needs the P2 in order to bring home the championship win in his debut in Tier 1. Will Jack be able to do it, or will he go for the temptation as well? We know Jack, being a youngster, very virile, full of fresh energy, he wants every single point he can get. But sometimes you just got to let them go, and I think really right now it's on Flapjack to find a way of keeping this P2, which Jack is doing everything he needs right now to make sure he just simply takes that P2 back. Now, crunch time, of course. Mr. Sean has come into the pits from P4. That releases Jaganat up into P4. Mr. Sean comes out then, and he is cleared P6, P7 and P8. So from Mr. Sean's perspective now, he is in a one-way battle for P4 against Jaganat. Of course, the gap is more than just a second. It's 4.5 seconds, but it will all come down to what Sean can do on this final stint, because we believe that Jaganat is not due another pit stop. So Sean is going to have to put in the legwork now and essentially put in the laps of his life to close up on his main competitor for P4. Will he be able to do it? We suspect that Jaganat will probably be the faster of the two if it's all about one lap pace, simply because Jaganat out-qualified Sean. But the return, of course, is Sean is very good in managing the car, and the Citroen is a very easy car to manage in the Group 3 category in terms of tyre life and also fuel. So I think Sean's in the commanding position. Should mistakes start to creep in, it'll be on Jaganat's side that the mistakes occur, not Sean's. But of course, both drivers are very professional in their approach to the racing, and we'll have to find out as G-Rabbit comes out of the pit and is comfortably in P9, that finds himself a long way down on P8 and quite a way ahead of P10, which is being held by Berkey Baby currently. Now, meanwhile, behind all this going on, we can see that Jack is now getting closer and closer to Flapjack here. Flapjack feeling the pressure from Jack, and I think Flapjack is due for his pit stop any moment now, and I think this is going to be a fruitless adventure trying to hold Jack up for as long as possible, and he'll do it, of course, to try and make Jack make a mistake, alternatively simply crunch his tyres. But you can see just how strong Jack's driving is through the opening sector here, and he's going to the outside, and I think he might be looking for the cutback, and he goes very late on the brakes there, but I think second of it, I think he was going to go for a lunge, but then thought, you know what, it's not going to be worth it here, because it's not in Jack's interest to make a mistake right now. He just simply needs to take the P2 to bring it home and keep a clean race here. But it's going to be close, as Flapjack, you can see he is definitely struggling here, but Jack, Zefix's Jack behind him, is just charging a lap after lap, corner after corner here, and now the pressure is on, and I'm not sure whether Flapjack's going to be able to keep the charging Zefix Jack behind him, as we see that Zefix Jack behind is lagging quite heavily here, and that's going to be difficult. And it's going to be, well, it's going to be a battle on the brakes, I think, into 15 once again, as they're all coming through the slalom right now. And, well, I think Jack's going to feel a little bit of the understeer because of the fact he's running the dirty air of Flapjack's car, and you can see he has fallen back a little bit, but now he's starting to get on that power once again, and that Audi being so strong in these high-speed hairpins, just able to plant it on that apex compared to Flapjack. But of course the tyre wear is coming into effect, and I think now in the drag race down to turn 1, Jack is the closest he's ever been to Flapjack. Flapjack holding that inside line as defensively as he can before starting to make his way out, but I think that Jack is going to go for the cutback here, but Flapjack parks it on the apex here, cutting all of Jack's momentum. So Flappy, we're going to refer to him as Flappy to make it easier for you folks. Flappy holding on for dear life here versus Jack and doing everything he can to essentially hold Jack at bay. But remember, Flapjack does not have the fuel to go to the end, so this is going to be a fruitless adventure. He's just simply buying Plux the Duck essentially time right now, and it's time which Plux doesn't need. And whilst this is going on, Senna is into the pits, as is Gadget, and that is important in the battle for P6. Now, where is Muller on track? Muller is coming down the start-finish straight then, and I think Gadget has just come out of the pits, so Gadget and Senna have both come out, but Muller has gone for it into turn 1. He's gone very late on the brakes, and I think Senna is going to come back in front of him here, and that was a mistake by Muller because Senna now is ahead, but these two are going to be battling. Of course, we flick back to Flapjack and Jack, and we can see that Jack has finally got the move done on a Flappy there, and we're just going to give you a quick replay back of what happened there, riding on board, of course, with Zephyx Jack. So we switch to the onboard camera of the Audi driver, and what you can see is here he just simply had the tyre life available, and he decided to send it as Jack went a bit wider to try to get onto the apex. A little bit of contact between the drivers there, maybe felt a little bit by Flappy that he was lent on, but I think it was going to happen eventually in terms of the move being made. You can see Flapjack flashing his lights there in the corner of the camera shot at the top, and I think he's trying to say as Flapjack comes into the pits, now you do lean on me a little bit, and that might be something which does get raised afterwards. Our stewards will look at that, of course, but I think it's all fair in love and war, simply because Flapjack was coming to the end of the stint there, and it was a valiant effort. But now Flapjack has got about 11 seconds to gain on Zephyx's Jack, and I don't think he's going to close that down unless Jack has an unexpected pit stop at this point or a major mistake. I think that's how it's going to stand, and really the big battle's opening up now in terms of the battle for P6, with Muller CJ being the gentleman who's going to be on the charge, but it hasn't worked out because he's come out behind both Senna and Gadget, and it really has proven that this time going for those long stints has not worked out for the Aston Martin driver, whereas it's normally worked out for him. This time it hasn't. He's got to do everything on circuit now, and Senna, I think, is already starting to pull enough of a gap here to feel comfortable, and he's trying to chase after Gadget, and Gadget will be probably smiling right now, thinking he's only got 10 minutes to go before he pulls off what in his mind might be a bit of a surprise P6, or perhaps is intentional along. I'll tell you one thing, folks, I'm surprised where Gadget is right now, but well done to the man. The Brit showing us that sometimes having those quiet races where there's nothing happening, there can be a lot of action. Just save it for the last 10 minutes as Senna goes wide there out of turn 4, and it looks as though he's lost a bit of momentum now. Will Muller be able to capitalise? He is gradually capitalising here, but Senna didn't go too wide as to get the full 4 wheels on the grass. He just about kept 1 wheel on the curb there, so he's kept it under control initially, but you can see that Senna is trying to push really hard as, hold on a second, Jack is into the pits. Now what on earth's this about? Is he going for fastest lap? Because he's going to come out in front of Flapjack at this point, but that is Jack into the pits here. I think he's going for fastest lap, knowing that he can come out in front of Flapjack, because there's no other reason why he would have pitted. He didn't take on fuel, the tyres were in a condition to go to him. I think that's a safety stop. That must be a safety stop by the team, because, well, there's no other point to pit at this point, but I think Jack's just going for a safety call there, because he has got 4.5 seconds ahead of Flapjack after the pit stop, and Flapjack now, if he wants to get that P2, is going to have to nail every lap, but he'll know that Zephyx's Jack is on a completely fresh set of tyres, so that's going to even be a bigger hill to climb. Meanwhile, up front, of course, our race leader, having been our race leader since the start, Plux the Duck, is just soldiering on 30.1 seconds ahead of everybody else, starting with Zephyx's Jack, and I think Plux here hasn't put a foot wrong. He really hasn't put a foot wrong, and he just needs to keep waiting right now and see where it ends up in terms of anybody makes a mistake, well, particularly his main championship rival, Zephyx's Jack, because if he does, and I can see that Plux is responding, so now it's becoming a competition of who can set the fastest lap here. Plux did have some heavily worn tyres, we should point out, but I think this is all about who can set the fastest lap. I think the two championship rivals are thinking, you know what, we're going to fight over everything, even if we can't see each other in circuit. Is it petty? No, it's definitely not, folks. Every point counts for these drivers, and every record, every little win counts. Even if they're not going to win the championship today, they'll still want to pick up every single win to get brownie points over the other driver to say, well, I beat you in doing this, no, and vice versa. So that means now Jack is coming on to his first fast lap after changing the tyres here. He will have Berkey Baby in front of him. But the question, of course, will be now, given these two drivers have gone to fresh tyres and maybe going for qualifying laps, is this sensible? Because if they get 1 foot wrong here, this could prove to be a critical mistake. And if they pick up heavy damage as well, as Jagannat comes into the pits, but this is a scheduled stop, but this is a little bit of a surprise. And now where's this going to bring him out versus Mr. Sean? Looking in on the camera there, you can see that Sean is out ahead of Jagannat. Now Jagannat has got it all to do. Now you probably think from Jagannat's perspective, he probably went for this stop because he knows that he'll come out near, if not slightly ahead of Sean, and Sean has got to defend for dear life right now in the closing 7 minutes. He can't afford a stop, but he's got relatively good tyres, but Jagannat is going to be so fresh on his tyres, and he's already trying to size up a move here as they come into turn number 4, and you can see that Jagannat is going to try and go all the way round the outside, and he holds it in position. Sean gives him the space. My goodness, on that fresh set of supersofts and low fuel, Jagannat showing us how it's done at turn 4, going all the way round and making Sean look like he's standing still by comparison. Of course he's not, but goodness me. And well, even further back right now in the battle for P6, Gadget is being caught by Senna, and that gap has come down to half a second. Now unless Gadget's made a mistake somewhere, he definitely hasn't taken a pit stop. I think Senna right now is on a charge, and Muller's fallen out of contention for the battle for P7, P6. But Gadget is definitely in a battle. He finds himself in a last-minute battle here with Senna. And Senna is a very fast driver when he nails it. And he's definitely nailing the time now. And we've got other drivers pitting. That's Berkey Baby pitting from last place here. Just a final stop, a scheduled stop, I believe. But looking at Gadget and Senna, Senna's had a very bad time through turn 10 because he's dropped already 3 tenths back and out of the slipstream zone. But now as they come into the final set of corners, the Mercedes V8 drifting all over the slalom there. And Senna is just losing time after time there and falling away from Gadget. I think Senna's pushing the car too hard and trying to get as close as possible to Gadget, but Senna just needs to call it off. He's got 4 laps remaining, and he needs to remember the fact that if he can get close enough and wait until the very end, that's where Gadget's going to be at his most vulnerable, and he'll be subject to the V8 power of the Mercedes. Now, keeping in mind right now that Sean has not given up in chasing Jagannat. That gap between these two is only 8 tenths. It is expanding, but it's then oscillating between about 7 tenths to a second. So you can imagine that if Jagannat makes even one mistake, Sean is going to be there to pounce. And we know how strong Sean is in these critical moments where he feels the pressure. Not at all. Instead, he just puts in lap after lap. And you could expect that perhaps he'll go for a move right at the end if he's close enough. But Jagannat doing everything he needs right now to finish in P4. But in return, further up the field, you can see that Plux the Duck currently sitting 24 seconds ahead of Zephyx's Jack, who is 5.2 seconds ahead of Flapjack. But these guys go for the fastest lap, and Flapjack trying to find a way of catching up with Zephyx's Jack, but I don't think he's going to be able to do it. That gap is getting wider and wider here, and I think in Flapjack's mind right now, it's just about bringing P3 home. He couldn't get himself into P2 unless Jack makes a mistake at this point. But as we come on to lap 55 for our top 3 then, really the biggest battles out on circuit right now are between our P4 and P5 runners and our P6 and P7 runners, and the closest guys on circuit are Jagannat and Mr. Sean in P4 and P5 respectively. But Jagannat really putting in a lap after lap, and with only 3 laps remaining for these guys, with the laps coming in at just over 1.5 minutes, I think Jagannat is doing everything he needs right now to hold on. Not too far to go for Jagannat, but of course, be tired now. We've almost gone an hour and a half of racing. The legs start to hurt, the arms start to hurt, the eyes start to close and not want to stay open. Drivers start to feel a bit dehydrated. They haven't been taking water breaks in between stints, i.e. at the pit stop. And I'll tell you from experience, folks, when you're running these longer endurance races, whether it's 1.5 hours, 2 hours or 3 hours, once you've gone after an hour, you start to enter the zone of being in that grey area of how much further I've got to go. And looking at what's gone wrong here, we can see that there has been a mistake from Ayrton Senna, and I think that is the end of the battle for P6 unless Gadget goes for a mistake himself. Now let's ride on board with Senna what happened here. So he went for 2, he went as aggressive as possible into 2, hit the curb initially, and he's just simply not tucked himself himself onto the curb and found himself understeering off at 3 and then in the uphill run to 4. And that is all about what we were just talking about there, the mistakes coming in at the last possible minute. And Senna has picked up major damage, and at the worst possible point, because Senna knows now he's only got 3 minutes to go. Will he stay out or will he repair that damage? If I was in Senna's shoes right now, you've got to go for broke, surely. You've just got to stay out there. But Senna, in a wounded car, will now need to try and hold on for 2 more laps versus Muller CJ, who is 3.4 seconds behind him and slowly closing. And, well, Senna's not going to be chased after P6, but surely he can bring home a P7 here, one of his best results of the season. We'll have to wait and find out here. As we can see, Sean in the rear of your camera shot there. Not Sean, sorry, Muller in the rear of your camera shot there. Not really gaining on Senna at this point. And I think Muller right now may be feeling that tyre wear coming on those soft tyres. And I think Senna might have done everything he needs to do here, even with that damage, to come home safe and sound. In that battle for P4, meanwhile, we can see that Sean has now dropped a further second back on Jagannath. And I think Jagannath has simply hooked it all up at this point. Unless there's a mistake, I think Jagannath's going to be holding on to that P4. So 2 minutes to go then, ladies and gentlemen. I think the majority of the fighting has subsided now, unless there's any mistakes from anybody right it. And we can see that the fastest lap has now been raised to a 1:32.1 by Plux the Duck. Plux definitely wanted to stake his claim to that fastest lap tonight to prove that he was the fastest guy at this circuit in the race trim. Of course, we never know whether Jack is going to respond on the final lap, but I think if he's going to do it, it'll be on 2 laps remaining, so he's going to come across the line with 1:50 to go, so he'll definitely get 2 more laps in, and it'll be the same with Flapjack. He's going to be doing a 57th and a 58th lap. But in terms of drivers who are going to be finishing after their next lap, it'll be their final lap on lap 57. It'll be Jagannath who leads the field round on that final lap 57. And Jagannath, well, it's been a phenomenal race by the Frenchman. It's probably not been the race he wanted. He probably thought he could have a chance at the podium here, but he'll be happy with his P4, and it essentially wraps up what has been a very solid season for him. And I think, based on the standings right now, that will put him in the position whereby he will improve a little bit on the 22 points in his P5 in round number 6. He'll give him an extra 4 points and it will cement his place. And this will be a brilliant P3 in the Season 6 Championship by Jagannath here, if all finishes as currently expected. Of course, we've still got 1 lap to go for the Frenchman, so who knows what could happen here. Mr. Shaw, meanwhile, will in his P5 today, that's a further 22 points. That will enable him to improve by a considerable number, and we'll go through all the championship number changes at the end of the race, folks. But I think Mr. Sean is picking up a good improvement in terms of overall points haul here with 22 today, and well, we could see him jump a place in the championship at the very end. But with only half a minute to go before we start to call time on this race, then it is Plux the Duck up front right now. And all of our drivers are so heavily spaced out in terms of out on circuit, not spaced out in terms of their eyeballs. We're not going to go into all that. That's a bit adult for this commentary. But what you can imagine is that they'll be feeling, and a number of them will just be simply asking for the race to end now. Flapjack's going to come around to begin his 58th and final lap then, as both Plux and Jack have also done so. But it's going to be the first driver then to complete tonight's race after 57 laps in 4th place. It is the Frenchman of Jagannath, who, whilst having made some minor mistakes, has not put a major foot wrong, and this is a brilliant conclusion to his season for Jagannath. Well done to the Frenchman coming home in P4. Behind him, the Briton Mr. Sean, a valiant effort from Mr. Sean, once again showing how long a car can be made to go on stints, and Gadget bringing it home in P6. The Brit will be happy with this one, having had a rather mixed bag of results. This is one of his best ill field tonight. Behind him, Senna coming home in P7, missing out on that opportunity to fight for P6 at the end after some mistakes, and Muller missing out on that battle for P6 and 7. G-Rabbit, who's going to be coming home soon, but coming around the final corner then. It's been the perfect race from Plux, but I don't think it's going to be enough to win the championship. It is Plux the Duck coming home after 58 laps, slowly bringing it across the line with the fastest lap of a 1:32.1 as well. He's done everything perfectly today, Plux, but it just hasn't worked out in the championship. He thought he was going to have a great opportunity, but this man right here, Zephyx's Chat, on his debut in Tier 1 in Season 6, is coming around the final corner right now. He has been unstoppable with the momentum despite it all, and he's coming home in 2nd place, and this will seal, as I understand it, his championship win in Season 6. And behind him, the man who tried to battle for P2 but lost out on the strategy element and an instant earlier in the race is Flapjack 247. Coming home in P3, a valiant effort from Flapjack. And last across the line in P9 is G-Rabbit from Finland. Those are your final classification, folks, and congratulations to Plux the Duck. So we do have confirmation there that Plux the Duck did pick up the fastest lap, that 132.1 right at the end. And what a phenomenal end to the season it's been. All the action happened early on in this one. It was a bit of a quiet race, but there were some tense moments as we went through the hour and a half. There will be a lot of questions asked about what happened with regards to Awesome Alex and Flapjack. That instant there where Alex retired the car and Flapjack, looking back at it, I think Flapjack just made the wrong call to try and go round Alex there. He just simply found himself going to the wrong place at the wrong time and ending up dropping so much ground. And whilst he regained so much of it, it just wasn't enough to get him back into the fight for P2. But there's your final standings, folks. And as we crunch this into our calculator then in terms of the final results, what I can tell you is that with Jack picking up 40 points here, and with Plux picking up 52 points because he also got the fastest lap, so that's 2 points on top of the 50 for the race win. Jaganat picking up a total of 26 tonight. G-Rabbit coming home in what was a 9th place, so picking up the 14 points there. Bottle Job not racing tonight, so picking up a tiny 0 because he wasn't racing here. And Mr. Sean coming home in P5 and picking up 22 points. What I can tell you in the final standings then, it will be Jack who has won the championship with 282 points, subject to any stewards' decisions, over Plux, who came home with 234 points in the end. In terms of the battle for P3, Jaganat brought it home with 162 points, and G-Rabbit was able to hold on to P4 with 140 points, seeing off the change from Sir Bottle Job and Mr. Sean. Mr. Sean pipping Bottle Job to P5 in the standings with 136 points in the end. Bottle Job missing out by 2 points. What an ending and what a season it has been.
And with that, that's all we've got time for today. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and or subscribe to both my channel and also the official Drivers Room YouTube channel, as may be found in the description of this video. But until next time, I've been your host TX141 or Britain a Spit, and remember to stay safe, stay well, stay smiling, but most importantly, stay on track.